Fictionalism in mathematics is a provocative and counterintuitive stance that claims numbers, sets, and mathematical entities don't actually exist. Instead, they are useful fictions, like Sherlock Holmes or unicorns, creations of the human mind that help us navigate the world but have no grounding in reality. To a fictionalist, when someone says 2 + 2 = 4, they aren't describing a truth about abstract objects floating in some Platonic realm. They're engaging in a kind of structured storytelling that just happens to work incredibly well. Fictionalism in mathematics. This idea cuts at the heart of how we understand truth and certainty. We grow up believing math is the most solid, objective part of knowledge, a foundation that can't be shaken. But fictionalism suggests it's all scaffolding, an illusion we lean on because it gets the job done. It's a script, not a mirror. This view doesn't deny math's power. On the contrary, it marvels at how something invented can be so terrifyingly accurate. Planets obey the laws of Newtonian mechanics, not because math is woven into the universe's DNA, but because we've written a language that mimics its behavior with eerie precision. It's as if the universe is pretending to obey our made-up rules. And yet, if math is fiction, what does that say about physics? About logic? About the structure of reality itself? How can non-existent things produce real-world consequences, like bridges standing or rockets launching? Fictionalism forces us to look at the abyss between belief and truth, and it leaves you wondering whether certainty is just a beautiful lie we keep telling ourselves. Molinism. Molinism is a haunting attempt to reconcile human free will with divine foreknowledge, a puzzle that has tormented theologians and philosophers for centuries. At its core lies one radical idea that God possesses something called middle knowledge. This is not knowledge of what is or what must be, but of what would happen in every possible circumstance, even if those circumstances never occur. God knows what you would freely choose in every imaginable scenario, not because he causes it, but because he simply knows. Imagine a being so omniscient that even your deepest unspoken decisions in hypothetical worlds are perfectly transparent to him. If you had been born in another country with a different upbringing, God knows whether you would have become a doctor or a criminal, a believer or a skeptic. Every fork in your life, even the ones you never took, is fully visible to him. This terrifying precision means God can orchestrate the world's events without violating anyone's freedom. He can place you in a situation where he knows you will freely choose a certain path without forcing your hand. It's a divine chess match, and every move you make is yours, even though he foresaw it from the beginning of time. But this idea burns through the mind like fire. If God knew your every free choice before you were born, are you really free at all? If your salvation or damnation hinges on decisions he foresaw and placed you in perfect conditions to make, does responsibility still rest with you? Molinism doesn't answer these questions. It dares you to live with them. Quietism. Quietism is not a philosophy that demands answers. It is one that whispers for silence. It does not build systems or declare truths. It retreats from the noise of metaphysical battles and ethical absolutism, offering instead a stillness that feels both unsettling and profoundly intimate. Quietism holds that many philosophical problems are not real problems at all, but the result of confused language, false assumptions, and an overactive need to explain what might be better left unspoken. To the quietist, the relentless pursuit of grand theories of truth, meaning, consciousness, morality is a kind of fever dream. Philosophy, they believe, should not construct castles in the air. It should untangle the knots in our thinking, and when the knots are gone, nothing remains to be said. The goal is not to dominate uncertainty, but to learn how to stop struggling against it. Imagine spending your life trying to capture the wind in a jar, only to discover that the wind was never meant to be trapped. That is how Quietists see traditional philosophy. They step back, not because they are indifferent, but because they recognize the futility in chasing shadows. In a world addicted to answers, Quietism asks the forbidden question: what if we've been asking the wrong questions all along? This isn't peace. It's a kind of philosophical exile, a surrender not born of weakness, but of clarity. There is a strange freedom in letting go of the need to know, a calm in accepting that some things are better understood by not speaking at all. Internal realism. Internal realism is a deeply unsettling challenge to how we define truth, reality, and objectivity. It tells us that reality is not some cold, external thing waiting to be discovered, like buried treasure. Instead, it insists that reality is inextricably tied to our conceptual schemes, our language, our categories, our ways of understanding the world. There is no view from nowhere, no absolute reality detached from how we think and speak about it. What is real is what makes sense within our framework. This philosophy doesn't deny the existence of an external world. It simply argues that we can never access it without filtering it through human thought. The world we experience, the world of colors, objects, time, and cause, is not just out there. It's shaped by how we describe it, how we measure it, how we interpret it. Our minds don't just look at the world, they construct it. Truth, then, isn't a perfect mirror of an independent reality. It's what fits best within a coherent, justified worldview. It's what works within a network of beliefs, rather than what corresponds to some unreachable metaphysical absolute. This means that what's true can shift with perspective, with language, with context, and that's where the unease creeps in. If reality is always internal to our systems, then how do we know we're not trapped in a beautifully constructed illusion? If truth is system-dependent, then what happens when systems collide? Is there any anchor in the storm of interpretation, or are we forever adrift in our own minds, calling it a map when it's really just a mirror? Process structuralism. Process structuralism is a quiet rebellion against the frozen architecture of traditional metaphysics, where classical thought builds reality from fixed substances and permanent forms. Process structuralism whispers something different. Reality is flow. It is movement, unfolding, transformation. Structures exist, but not as static frameworks. They are patterns in motion, momentary shapes in the river of becoming. Nothing is truly still. Everything is process wearing a temporary face. At the heart of this philosophy is a refusal to treat the world like a machine made of solid, separable parts. Instead, it sees patterns, relations, and interdependencies, structures that emerge, dissolve, and emerge again. A wave is not a thing but a form that rides on the back of moving water. Likewise, identities, systems, and meanings are not fixed entities. They are rhythms in the process of life. This view destabilizes everything. It refuses to let anything stay comfortably defined. The self, society, knowledge, even logic itself, none are foundational in the way we hope. They are structured only in the way a flame is structured. Beautiful, real, but always changing, never static. Every time we point and say, "This is what it is," the process is already becoming something else. It is a philosophy that offers no solid ground, only shifting paths. And in that, it exposes the human need to freeze time, to cling to identities, to carve permanence into impermanence. Process structuralism doesn't destroy structure. It dissolves it in motion, revealing that what we call stable is just the eye of a storm we've learned to name. Subtle realism. Subtle realism walks a fragile line between skepticism and certainty, whispering that truth exists, but only if we're humble enough to seek it without arrogance. It doesn't cling to the cold, rigid objectivity of classical realism, nor does it fall into the chaotic despair of full-blown relativism. Instead, it offers a quiet, careful path. Reality is out there, but our access to it is always partial, always interpreted, always human. This philosophy is born from the realization that our knowledge is soaked in subjectivity. Every observation, every claim, every truth we believe is filtered through language, culture, emotion, and bias. But that doesn't mean the world is unknowable or that truth is an illusion. It means we approach reality like light passing through frosted glass, blurred, distorted, but not completely obscured. Subtle realism forces us to confront our limitations without abandoning hope. It admits that science, history, and human experience are fallible, yet still meaningful. It accepts that knowledge is constructed within social and linguistic frameworks, but insists that these constructions can point us towards something real, something independent of our opinions and desires. It is not a comforting view. It demands intellectual humility and the courage to live without guarantees. It challenges the ego that wants to own the truth, instead asking us to honor it quietly, carefully, and always with the awareness that we might be wrong. In a world addicted to certainty, subtle realism offers something quieter and more fragile, the possibility of truth, held in trembling hands. Critical rationalism. Critical rationalism begins with a bold admission. We are probably wrong about everything. It doesn't matter how carefully we argue, how much evidence we collect, or how sincerely we believe. We are fallible creatures fumbling through a world we barely understand. And yet, this isn't a philosophy of despair. It's a philosophy of relentless courage. It dares us to build knowledge not on certainty, but on criticism, doubt, and the willingness to be proven wrong. Originating from Karl Popper's defiant mind, critical rationalism turns the entire idea of knowledge on its head. Instead of trying to justify beliefs, it insists that we test them, challenge them, expose them to fire, and see what remains. Truth is not something we can prove. We can only inch toward it by eliminating falsehood. The moment we believe we've found unshakable truth, we've stopped thinking. This is not a comforting view. It strips away the warm safety of final answers and replaces it with the cold, exhilarating demand to stay open, always. Every theory, every belief, every worldview is on trial, including your own, especially your own. What makes this philosophy powerful and quietly brutal is its ethical demand. It asks for humility in a world that rewards dogma. It teaches that growth comes not from being right, but from being brave enough to risk being wrong. In the end, critical rationalism is less about knowing and more about learning how to not stop questioning, even when the cost is everything you once believed. Foundherentism. Foundherentism is a quiet rebellion against one of the oldest battles in epistemology, the war between foundationalism and coherentism. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't tear down systems. It simply stitches them together in a way that feels almost too reasonable to be noticed. And yet, beneath its modest tone lies a revolution in how we think about knowledge, belief, and justification. Foundationalism claims that our knowledge rests on bedrock, self-evident truths or direct experiences that need no further support. Coherentism rejects that, insisting that beliefs are justified only by their fit within a web of other beliefs, like a spider's web with no anchor. Foundherentism steps between them, quietly asking, why not both? It tells us that justification is not a matter of starting from unshakable foundations, nor of floating in a sea of circular reasoning. Instead, knowledge arises from a hybrid of experiential input and logical interconnection, like a crossword puzzle, where some answers come from clues, the world, and others from intersecting words, our beliefs. We build understanding not from certainty, but from structure and support working together. This view doesn't just change how we think, it changes how we live. It forces us to admit that we never stand on pure certainty. We are always balancing, adjusting, rechecking. Every belief we hold is part of a living system, part rooted in the world, part entangled in the beliefs that came before it. And in that messy, evolving process, we find something more honest than certainty. We find a truth that breathes. Object-oriented ontology, or OOO, begins with a quiet revolt. It breaks the human spell cast over philosophy, the assumption that everything in existence must somehow revolve around human thought, perception, or usefulness. It dares to say, things exist on their own, in their own right, regardless of whether we see them, think about them, or use them. A rock on a distant moon, a grain of dust beneath your bed, a shadow cast by a building no one notices. All of them matter, all of them are. This philosophy pulls us out of the center of the universe. It dethrones human consciousness from its imagined empire and insists that objects have their own reality, deep, withdrawn, and forever unknowable. We don't fully access a chair just by sitting in it, or understand a tree simply by studying its biology. Every object hides part of itself. Every interaction is partial. The world is full of secrets, even in the things we touch every day. O sees reality not as a flat plane of utility or perception, but as a vast ocean of beings, human and non-human, visible and invisible, present and distant, all interacting, colliding, avoiding, withdrawing. It forces us to confront the eerie thought that a broken toaster or a dying star might have as much ontological weight as your consciousness. It's a deeply humbling worldview and a deeply disturbing one, because if things are not just for us, then perhaps the world isn't either. Perhaps meaning isn't centered on us. Perhaps the cosmos is not a mirror, but a wilderness of objects, indifferent, strange, and endlessly alive. Phenomenological Reduction. Phenomenological reduction is not a method for discovering facts. It's a brutal, almost surgical stripping away of everything you think you know, until only the raw experience remains. It begins with a single radical move. Suspend all your judgments about the external world. Don't assume anything is real. Don't assume anything is true. Let the entire world fall away until all that remains is the way it appears to you in this very moment. This is not detachment, it's exposure. You are no longer protected by assumptions, categories, or labels. You are left face to face with your own consciousness, bare and defenseless. What does it feel like to see a tree, to hear a voice, to suffer grief? Not what the tree is made of, not what the voice means, just the experience as it lives in your awareness. The goal is to reach the essence of things, not by dissecting them, but by seeing them as they truly appear, unclouded by expectation. It is a descent into immediacy, where you learn not what the world is, but how it shows itself to your mind. And in that raw encounter, everything changes. Time becomes fluid. Objects lose their solidity. Identity starts to shimmer. You begin to realize how much of your life is built on autopilot, on habits of thought that veil reality rather than reveal it. Phenomenological reduction forces you to let go of even your most sacred certainties, not to destroy meaning, but to rediscover it in its most intimate, terrifying, and luminous form. Event ontology. Event ontology tears apart the illusion of static being. It tells us that nothing is, everything happens. Reality is not made of things sitting in place like chess pieces on a board. It is made of events, eruptions, flashes of becoming that ripple and vanish. You are not a fixed self. You are a storm of experiences, memories, sensations, and thoughts that rise and fall in time. Even the ground beneath your feet is not a thing, but a process, a quiet, ongoing tremor we mistake for solidity. This philosophy doesn't just describe change. It insists that change is all there is. There are no eternal substances hiding beneath the surface, no secret core behind the mask. What we call objects, Tables, trees, bodies are just stable patterns in a sea of activity, like whirlpools that seem to hold their shape but are only ever made of moving water. To be is to unfold, to shift, to break and reform in every moment. And that realization breaks something inside us because we long for permanence. We ache to believe in something that stays, a soul, a truth, a foundation. But event ontology gives us no such comfort. It tells us that the world dances and we are part of that dance, not the dancers, not the stage, just the motion itself. It changes how we see death, not as the end of a thing, but the closing of an event. It redefines existence, not as presence, but as occurrence, and it forces us to ask, if everything is an event, then what are we trying so hard to hold on to? Hypermodernism. Hypermodernism is not a philosophy you arrive at. It's one that crashes into you when the future arrives too fast and leaves the soul lagging behind. It is the child of postmodernism, but without the irony. It knows the games are over. It doesn't deconstruct meaning for fun. It watches meaning dissolve in real time and asks, what now? In a hypermodern world, everything accelerates. Consumption, communication, identity, they spin faster than our minds can catch up. We don't live in narratives anymore. We live in fragments. We don't believe in truth. We believe in trending. The self becomes fluid, customizable, disposable. The future used to be a dream. Now it's a weight pressing against the present, demanding constant reinvention. Hypermodernism is obsessed with control and perfection, yet tormented by its own emptiness. We track our sleep, our steps, our serotonin, trying to optimize a life we barely feel. We curate ourselves online like brands. We measure time in screens, not seasons. Progress has become a mirror that blinds us, reflecting back our most manic impulses. But beneath the sleek surface, something aches. Hypermodernism exposes the hunger for permanence in a world that has none. It reveals how the pursuit of the ultimate version of everything, body, thought, relationship, only deepens the void. We are more connected than ever and more alone, more advanced and more anxious. Hypermodernism doesn't offer a solution. It's a diagnosis. It tells us that the crisis isn't coming. It's here, in our pockets, in our minds, in the terrifying silence we feel when the screen goes dark. Modal Realism. Modal realism is a philosophical wildfire. It doesn't just question reality, it multiplies it. According to this view, every possible world you can imagine is not just a thought experiment or a hypothetical scenario. It exists, literally. Somewhere in some universe, you made a different choice. Somewhere, dinosaurs never went extinct. Somewhere, everything is the same except one raindrop fell an inch to the left. And all of these worlds are just as real as this one, just as vivid, just as concrete. They don't live in your mind. They are. This idea, championed most famously by David Lewis, is not metaphor or poetry. It's metaphysics at its most extreme. It claims that possibility is not a concept. It is a dimension. Every way the world could have been is the way some world actually is. That means infinite versions of you exist. Laughing, crying, dying, never born at all. It's not science fiction. It's ontological commitment. And yet, the emotional weight of this idea is staggering, because if all possible outcomes truly exist, then the stakes of our decisions dissolve. The version of you who failed lives on. So does the one who succeeded beyond imagination. Are you just one echo in an endless chorus? Does your triumph matter if your failure is real somewhere else? Modal realism erases the monopoly of the present. It crushes the illusion of the only world. It forces you to confront a multiverse that doesn't just exist out there, but right here, behind every choice you didn't make. Immanent realism. Immanent realism is a quiet refusal to believe in distant, abstract worlds. It insists that universals, those mysterious properties like redness, beauty, justice, are not floating in some invisible realm. detached and unreachable. They are here, embedded within the things we encounter, real and present in the very fabric of the world. There is no need to ascend into Platonic heavens. Reality is not split between what is and what truly is. Everything we need is already before us. When you see a red apple, you don't need to imagine some eternal form of redness hovering in the cosmos. The redness is in the apple, part of its being, not a shadow of something purer. Immanent Realism tells us that the universals we see are real, not because they exist elsewhere, but because they exist within. This world, this ordinary, aching world, is the site of truth. It's a deeply grounding philosophy. It says, stop looking beyond, stop yearning for purity. What is real is what you can touch, describe, experience. The patterns are not behind the curtain. They are woven into it. Justice doesn't live in theory. It lives in action. Beauty is not an ideal. It's the light falling on someone's face at just the right moment, real and fleeting and true. But there's a cost. Immanent Realism offers no escape into perfection, no sanctuary in the abstract. It demands that you find meaning without leaving the mess. It asks you to believe that what is here is enough, and that can be the hardest belief of all. Transcendental Thomism. Transcendental Thomism is a quiet collision, an attempt to weld the mystical fire of Thomas Aquinas with the deep, questioning introspection of modern philosophy. It does not settle for the God out there or the soul as given. Instead, it digs into the very act of knowing itself, asking how we can know anything at all, and what that reveals about being, about God, and about ourselves. It's a philosophy that doesn't begin with the heavens or the scriptures. It begins with the human person, standing in the storm of existence, asking, how am I even able to ask? It fuses the metaphysical realism of Aquinas, that reality exists independently of us, that being is grounded in God, with the transcendental turn of Kant and others who insisted we must first understand the structures of our own consciousness. Transcendental Thomism doesn't deny the world. It simply asks, how is it that we are able to know it? And in that asking, it discovers something staggering, that the very structure of human thought points beyond itself, toward a source it did not create and cannot contain. To know anything at all, this philosophy claims, is to be already caught in a relation with being itself, and that relation whispers the presence of God, not as a conclusion, but as the silent condition for thought. You are not a sealed mind peering at the world. You are always already immersed in a reality you didn't invent, drawn toward a fullness you can't define, haunted by a mystery that knows you even as you struggle to know it. Inferentialism. Inferentialism pulls the ground out from under the way we think about meaning. It tells us that words don't mean anything on their own, not because they're empty, but because they are relational. A word, a concept, even a belief only has meaning through the web of inferences it supports and depends on. You don't understand a sentence by linking it to an object in the world. You understand it by grasping the other sentences it connects to, the claims it implies, the denials it excludes. To an inferentialist, meaning is not a label. It's a position in a network. Like a single move in a vast, invisible chess game, a word's power comes from how it shapes and is shaped by everything around it. You can't isolate freedom or truth or responsibility and point to them like objects on a shelf. You have to follow the threads, trace the implications, see what else must be true if that word is used. It's a demanding philosophy. It forces you to stop thinking of knowledge as a collection of static facts and start seeing it as a living system of reasons. It means that to believe something is to commit yourself to consequences, to defenses, to a world of other beliefs that must also hold. Language becomes a battlefield of accountability. Inferentialism doesn't just describe how we use language, it rewires how we think about thinking. You are never just saying something. You are taking a stand in a structure of thought, and every word pulls on 1,000 others, like a spider's web trembling in the dark. Ethical particularism. Ethical particularism is a rebellion wrapped in quiet logic. It doesn't come crashing in with manifestos. It simply asks a question that dismantles moral certainty. What if there are no universal moral rules, no fixed principles, no eternal laws, just people, moments, and the aching complexity of real life? According to particularism, the moral weight of an action doesn't depend on rigid codes. It depends on context. Every situation breathes its own meaning. What is right here might be wrong there. What once saved a life might, in another heartbeat, destroy it. This isn't moral chaos. It's moral sensitivity, a refusal to flatten human experience into formulas. It argues that our instincts, our judgments, our deep and often silent awareness of nuance matter more than any rulebook. Lying isn't always wrong. Telling the truth isn't always good. Generosity can wound. Kindness can betray. There is no clean algorithm that can guide us through the mess of being human. To live this way is to live awake. It requires more attention, not less. You must see people, not categories. You must feel the tension, the hesitation, the pulse of each decision as something sacred. Particularism doesn't offer clarity. It offers responsibility, the terrifying kind where you don't get to hide behind commandments, where every choice is yours and there are no excuses. And once you feel that, once you realize that morality might not be universal, but personal, situational, alive, you can't go back to black and white. You're left standing in the gray, your heart trembling, knowing the next move matters more than any law ever written. Logical atomism. Logical atomism is an austere dream of clarity, an attempt to break the chaos of language and thought into clean, indivisible pieces. It begins with the belief that the world is made of simple, discrete facts, atomic facts, that cannot be broken down any further. Each of these facts corresponds perfectly to a basic, irreducible proposition. Reality, in this view, is a mosaic of logical atoms, and language is the mirror that reflects them, piece by piece. To the logical atomist, if you could just get the structure of your language right, you could map the structure of the world. Every statement that truly means something would be a direct picture of a fact. All confusion, all philosophical nonsense, all error, it all comes from misusing language, from trying to say things that cannot be said. The goal is to build a perfect language, one where everything that can be known is expressed with crystalline precision. But beneath the clean geometry of this philosophy lies something colder. It views the world not as alive or sacred, but as a series of sterile, separate truths. There's no room for ambiguity, no tolerance for poetry, emotions, values, even the self. They become shadows on the wall, things that can't be captured in atomic propositions and therefore don't belong in serious thought. Logical atomism doesn't comfort. It severs. It dares to believe that behind all the noise of human experience is a quiet structure, waiting to be discovered, not with passion, but with logic sharp enough to cut through everything that isn't real. Metaontology. Metaontology is philosophy's ghost in the mirror, less concerned with what exists than with the very question, what do we mean when we ask what exists? It doesn't build a picture of the world. It steps back and asks why we think pictures are even the right tool. It's ontology turned inward, not the study of being, but the study of how we study being. And that shift cracks open a silent tension at the heart of metaphysics. When you say something exists, what are you really saying? Are you pointing at something out in the world? Or are you just using language a certain way? Does existence belong to things or to the frameworks we use to talk about things? Metaontology forces you to face the idea that existence might not be a simple label, but a philosophical minefield hidden beneath ordinary speech. It's a haunting realization because if we don't know what we're asking, how can we trust the answers we've built civilizations on? When we ask whether numbers exist, or whether universals are real, or whether the self is an illusion, are we debating reality or just confused about the meaning of the question? Some philosophers try to tame this unease with formal tools, quantifiers, logical frameworks, rigorous semantics. Others let it burn, arguing that our very concept of being is unstable, historically shaped, and linguistically fragile. Either way, Metaontology doesn't give us new answers. It shows us that the ground we stand on might not be ground at all, just the echo of a question we never fully understood. Neopragmatism. Neopragmatism is a philosophy of broken certainties. It looks at the grand towers of truth and objectivity and asks, what if they were never there to begin with? It doesn't try to rebuild metaphysics or revive the dream of an ultimate foundation. Instead, it shrugs off that ancient burden and says, truth is what works, here, now, for us. Knowledge isn't about mirroring some hidden reality. It's about coping, adapting, communicating, surviving. It's not a mirror, it's a tool. Rooted in the work of thinkers like Richard Rorty, neopragmatism lets go of the fantasy that language captures the world. Words don't describe the world as it is. They are part of the world, shaping it as we go. Theories are not ladders that climb toward truth. They are handrails we build to keep from falling. There is no final vocabulary, no perfect perspective, no God's eye view, just shifting vocabularies, each one trying to make sense of our lives and our pain. It's a philosophy that invites both liberation and unease, because if truth is contingent, if it lives within communities, within conversations, within what helps us move forward, then nothing is sacred except the willingness to keep talking. It means letting go of needing to be right in favor of staying engaged. It means accepting that what we call truth today may look like error tomorrow, and still being willing to live with that. Neopragmatism doesn't promise certainty. It offers solidarity. It trades the security of foundations for the fragile hope of better conversations, and in that fragility, it finds something achingly human. Neutral monism. Neutral monism feels like standing at the edge of a mirror that reflects both mind and matter, and then realizing the mirror is reality. It refuses the tired dualism between mind and body, thought and substance, inner and outer, and it rejects the idea that one must be reduced to the other. Instead, it whispers something more unsettling, that both mind and matter are made of the same thing, something deeper, something neutral, something that doesn't belong to either camp. This stuff of the universe, whether you call it pure experience, events, or some unnamed fabric, gives rise to both mental and physical phenomena depending on how it's arranged, how it's felt, how it unfolds. Your thoughts and your neurons are not different in substance. They are different expressions of the same underlying essence, not spirit, not matter, just this. And that idea slices through our deepest intuitions because we are taught to divide the world, mind versus machine, self versus environment, internal versus external. But neutral monism says those lines are illusions, convenient maps drawn over a reality that was never meant to be divided. The pain in your chest and the emotion that causes it are not two things. They are one thing appearing through two lenses. It is a philosophy of unity hidden in disguise. But that unity is not peaceful. It is disorienting. Because if everything is made of the same neutral fabric, where do you begin? Where does the world end? Neutral monism offers no anchor, only a strange, radiant stillness beneath the chaos of categories we thought were real. Constructivist Epistemology. Constructivist epistemology begins with a quiet revolution, the idea that knowledge is not discovered, it is constructed, that what we call truth isn't lying out there, buried under layers of ignorance, waiting to be found. It is built, brick by mental brick, through experience, interpretation, and the messy, relentless effort to make sense of the world. We are not passive observers of reality. We are its architects. This philosophy whispers what few dare to say, that reality as we know it is not objective and untouched. It is filtered through language, culture, memory, emotion. We do not see the world as it is. We see the world as we are, shaped by the frameworks we've inherited and the meanings we assign. There is no knowledge outside of this, no God's eye view, no raw facts untouched by perspective. Constructivist epistemology doesn't deny the world exists. It simply insists that the world we understand is inseparable from the way we construct it. A child learning that fire burns is not discovering an eternal truth. She is building meaning through pain, sensation, and story. A scientist mapping galaxies is not peering into the naked cosmos. He is arranging data into narratives that fit within a human mind. And in this view, certainty crumbles, but something else rises in its place: responsibility. If knowledge is made, not given, then what we build matters. What we teach, say, assume, remember. It all shapes the world others come to believe in. Constructivist epistemology leaves you standing in the ruins of objectivity, holding the terrifying, beautiful power of creation. Legal positivism. Legal positivism is a cold mirror held up to justice. It does not ask what should be law, only what is. It strips law of its moral clothing and demands we see it bare as a creation of human authority, power, and rules, not divine order, not natural rights, just systems built by people, enforced by institutions, and obeyed or not by force. Law, according to positivism, doesn't have to be fair. It just has to be made according to the rules. This view slices through idealism with surgical precision. A law can be cruel, unjust, even monstrous, and still be valid. What matters is not its morality, but its source. Did it come from a recognized authority? Was it enacted through proper procedures? Then it is law. Whether it ought to be obeyed is a different question entirely. And that separation is where the philosophy draws its power and its unease, because it demands clarity in a world drowning in emotion. It makes us face the uncomfortable truth that the law does not always align with justice, that a dictator's decree, if issued through a legal system, is still law, that courts can uphold evil while staying perfectly consistent with the rules they are bound by. Legal positivism does not endorse injustice. It simply refuses to confuse law with morality. It demands that if we want better laws, we must fight for them, reform them, resist them, replace them, but we must never pretend they are something they are not. The law is not a halo, it is a blade, and the hand that wields it is ours. Dispositionalism. Dispositionalism quietly changes how we see the fabric of reality, not by shattering it, but by revealing what pulses beneath the surface. It tells us that things are not defined solely by what they are, but by what they can do. A glass is fragile not because it breaks, but because it has the tendency to break. That tendency, that latent power, is not just a possibility, it is part of what the glass is. This philosophy shifts attention away from static properties and into the realm of potential. Dispositionalism sees the world as charged with hidden capacities, seeds of behavior that may never bloom, but still exist. Fire has the power to burn. Sugar has the power to dissolve. You have the power to love, to betray, to change, even if you never do. These aren't abstract options. They are real, woven into the essence of things. And this changes how we think about causation. The future doesn't unfold because of rigid laws imposed from above. It emerges from within through the awakening of dispositions that lie waiting for the right conditions. The world doesn't run like a machine. It grows, reacts, responds. But dispositionalism doesn't stop at objects. It turns its gaze inward. Your traits, your instincts, your darkness and light, they aren't just outcomes of experience. They're possibilities you carry. Some you nurture, some you suppress, some you never touch. And that knowledge is haunting because it means you are always more than what you've done. You are a storm of unrealized tendencies, and the life you live is just one path through all the lives you could have. Minimalism, truth theory. Minimalism about truth is the philosophy that sneaks in quietly, strips everything down, and whispers, truth doesn't need a theory. Where others build towering frameworks to explain what truth is, minimalism simply shrugs and says, to call something true is just to agree with it, nothing more. Saying it's true that snow is white adds nothing to just saying snow is white. The word true is a mirror, not a substance, not a force, not a deep metaphysical glue holding reality together. And that realization is unsettling in its simplicity, because we are taught to think of truth as sacred, as a thing to be uncovered, to be fought for, to be defined. But minimalism denies the romance. It refuses to treat truth as a hidden essence. Instead, it treats it like punctuation, useful, yes, but empty of content. This view pulls the floor out from under so many philosophical arguments. You can't build grand theories of correspondence or coherence when the word truth is just a grammatical placeholder. You can't anchor morality or science or belief in something that isn't really there to begin with. Minimalism stares at the world and says, maybe we've been chasing a shadow, building temples around a word that only ever pointed back to the sentence we already understood. And once you hear that, something shifts. You start to wonder how much of what we believe is built on scaffolding we never needed. How many of our deepest convictions are just echoes of ideas we could have said without ever using the word true at all. Pancritical Rationalism. Pancritical Rationalism is not a philosophy for the comfortable. It is for those who can stand in the ruins of certainty and still keep thinking. Born from the spirit of fallibilism and sharpened by the mind of William Warren Bartley, it takes the radical core of critical rationalism and pushes it further into something almost terrifying in its honesty. It says there is nothing, no belief, no value, no principle that is beyond criticism, not even this very idea. Unlike dogmas that demand obedience or foundations that beg for trust, pancritical rationalism refuses to kneel. It does not seek final justifications or unshakable truths. It does not rest on holy books, scientific axioms, or logical absolutes. It moves forward by tearing down and building again, knowing it may tear down again tomorrow. It is a system that lives by self-devouring thought, a philosophy that feeds on its own doubt and calls that strength. To live this way is to surrender your need for epistemic shelter. It's to accept that even your most cherished beliefs about justice, beauty, love, identity must be open to challenge, not because they're wrong, but because nothing is above question, and that includes the very process of questioning. This is not chaos. It is intellectual courage at its most extreme, a refusal to freeze thought in the name of comfort. Pancritical rationalism is like walking a tightrope over an abyss with no promise of safety, only the demand to keep walking, keep asking, keep doubting, because stopping means turning your back on truth the moment it tries to move. Non-cognitivism. Non-cognitivism is a quiet detonation at the heart of moral philosophy. It tells you that when someone says murder is wrong, they are not stating a fact. They are not describing some moral property that exists out there in the world. They are expressing something closer to a gasp, a shudder, a cry of protest. According to non-cognitivism, moral statements are not about truth. They're about emotion, attitude, and the raw pulse of human response. This idea doesn't deny that people care about right and wrong. It just says that when we speak about morality, we aren't talking like scientists or detectives. We're more like singers or poets, expressing approval, outrage, hope, or disgust. Saying stealing is bad is like booing a villain on stage. It communicates how we feel, not what is. and that thought unsettles everything because it means moral arguments can't be settled by evidence in the usual sense. There's no objective moral particle to find, no universal law etched into the fabric of the cosmos, just a tangle of instincts, reactions, and deeply felt commitments that don't point to truth, but radiate from within. Non-cognitivism doesn't say morality is meaningless. It says it's deeply human, but it also says we may never agree on moral matters because we're not arguing over facts. We're clashing with worldviews, values, emotional vocabularies, and when we shout at each other across the chasm, we're not disagreeing about what is. We're begging the other to feel differently. That is why it hurts. That is why it never ends. Anomalous Monism. Anomalous monism is a strange, unsettling whisper at the crossroads of mind and body. It says there is only one kind of substance. Everything is physical. Everything is part of the natural world, but it also insists that mental events, like your thoughts, desires, and pain, cannot be captured by strict physical laws. The mind is real. It happens in the same universe as atoms and stars, but it dances to a rhythm no equation can fully describe. This is the tension that haunts the philosophy. On one side, it rejects dualism. There are no ghostly souls floating apart from the body. Mental events are physical events. When you feel grief, neurons fire. When you make a choice, something shifts in your brain. But on the other side, it rejects reductionism. It refuses to flatten the mind into nothing more than mechanics. There is no law that can predict what you'll think next, no algorithm that captures the full texture of wanting, fearing, hoping. Donald Davidson, who gave this view its name, built it around a brutal honesty. The mental and the physical are not separate, but they do not speak the same language. You can't swap one for the other. There is no one-to-one translation, and that gap, the fact that your thoughts are your brain, but not just your brain, is where the philosophy lives. It's a position that leaves you suspended. You are physical, but not programmable. You are lawful, but not law-bound. You are an anomaly, a storm in a world of structure, a flicker of meaning that can't quite be measured. Epiphenomenalism. Epiphenomenalism is a philosophy that slices deep into the illusion of agency. It tells you something you may not want to hear, that your thoughts, your feelings, your sense of will might be nothing more than shadows cast by the brain's machinery. According to this view, mental events, your pain, your joy, your memories, your decisions are real, but they do nothing. They are the foam on the surface of the wave, never the force behind it. In this chilling picture, your brain operates like a closed physical system. Neurons fire, chemicals flow, synapses spark, and as a byproduct, consciousness emerges. But it's powerless. You don't lift your hand because you decide to. You lift it because your brain made it happen, and your decision came along for the ride. Like a ghost whispering after the fact, you feel like the author of your actions, but you're more like a narrator, describing a story that's already been written in the language of biology. It doesn't deny experience, it diminishes its role. Your love, your grief, your courage, they exist, but as echoes, observers, not engines. And this view cuts at the very core of what it means to be human. If your mind cannot change the world, what are you? A witness? A puppet dressed in fire? The weight of this idea is heavy. It asks you to consider that your consciousness, so intimate, so vivid, might be watching a play it didn't write, can't rewrite, and must still somehow call its life. Aesthetic Formalism. Aesthetic Formalism is a philosophy of beauty that cuts through emotion, story, and symbolism with surgical detachment. It claims that the value of art lies not in its meaning, its context, or its message, but in its form, the arrangement of shapes, the balance of color, the rhythm of composition. These are the soul of the work, not what it says, not how it makes you feel, but how it is, structurally, visually, tangibly. To the formalist, a painting of a weeping mother and a canvas of abstract lines are judged by the same standard, their formal qualities. The power of art is not in its subject, but in the way it uses space, balance, contrast, proportion. It is the cold, clean elegance of form that matters. Emotion is not dismissed, but it is not central. Narrative is not denied, but it is not necessary. Beauty, in this view, is not in the eye of the beholder. It is in the structure of the thing itself. This perspective is both liberating and brutal. It elevates art beyond propaganda, beyond politics, beyond sentiment, but it also strips it of voice. It silences history. It tells the viewer, forget what this means, look at how it's made. And that demand can feel hollow or holy, depending on where you stand. Because if all that matters is form, then what happens to the cry behind the canvas? What happens to the story that bleeds through the brushstrokes? Formalism doesn't answer. It simply holds up the frame and asks, is this not enough? Conceptual role, semantics. Conceptual role semantics creeps into the quiet spaces of language and meaning, not with bold claims but with a subtle inversion. It tells us that the meaning of a word, a symbol, a thought, isn't found in some fixed reference to the outside world. It's found in what it does within your mind. Meaning, in this view, is not about pointing to things. It's about the role a concept plays in your reasoning, your inferences, your internal web of beliefs. To understand a word is not just to match it to an object. It's to know how it behaves in the theater of thought. The word dog isn't just linked to a furry creature. It's wrapped in expectations, barking, tail wagging, loyalty, teeth. Its meaning lies in how it triggers other thoughts, how it moves through your mental system like a spark through wires. This view is deeply personal. It suggests that meaning is not floating out there in the world, but unfolding inside each mind. Every concept you use is shaped by the way you think, feel, argue, remember. Language becomes less of a map, more of a pulse. And that shift, quiet but radical, means that meaning is never static. It changes as your thoughts change, as your beliefs evolve. But that also means the ground beneath your words is always moving. If meaning lives in mental role, then no two people speak the exact same language. Communication becomes an act of translation between invisible worlds, and every word you say might carry a different weight in someone else's mind. You think you're speaking clearly, but you're only ever offering a thread into your own labyrinth. Deontic Logic. Deontic logic is the cold architecture of obligation. It doesn't ask what we feel we should do, it encodes it. It tries to take the trembling, conflicted, deeply human experience of duty and shape it into symbols, into rules, into formal systems of ought, must, and may not. In this world, morality is not a storm of conscience. It is a map of permissions and prohibitions, a syntax of what is allowed, forbidden, and required. This logic doesn't speak in pleas or parables. It speaks in precise conditions. If X is obligatory, then not X is forbidden. If Y is permitted, then Y is not forbidden. It builds a calculus of conscience, stripping away the chaos of emotion to reveal a skeletal code beneath, the human soul filtered through mathematical clarity. And yet, the tension is unbearable because real life doesn't obey clean logic. We face conflicts that defy structure, two duties that crash into each other, two wrongs where neither can be escaped. What happens when you must lie to save a life? What happens when every choice breaks a rule? Deontic logic struggles here. It staggers under the weight of contradiction as human morality spills outside its crisp borders, but it keeps trying, because in a world drowning in moral confusion, Deontic logic dares to impose order. It reaches for a system where justice is not a feeling, but a formula, and in doing so, it reminds us of something haunting. The desire to be good may be universal, but the language of goodness might be written in a code we're still learning to read. Spinozistic Determinism. Spinozistic determinism is not just a theory, it's a worldview that swallows free will whole and asks you to find peace in the aftermath. Rooted in the mind of Baruch Spinoza, it begins with a single trembling idea. Everything that exists is part of one infinite substance, God or nature, and everything that happens flows from it with perfect necessity. There is no room for randomness, no space for choice. The universe unfolds exactly as it must, like a vast, eternal equation playing out in time. You are not outside the system. You are in it, of it, governed by it. Every thought you have, every action you take, every feeling that rises in your chest, these are not free-floating decisions. They are outcomes of infinite causes, stretching backward beyond comprehension. You were always going to read these words, not because you chose to, but because the universe arranged itself in such a way that you could do nothing else. And yet, there is something strangely divine in this vision. Spinoza doesn't offer a cold, mechanical fate. He offers unity. You are not a separate, suffering fragment struggling against chaos. You are a necessary expression of the same power that moves the stars. To understand this is to be free, not free to choose otherwise, but free from illusion, free to accept your place in the great unfolding. But that freedom feels different. It does not liberate your will. It silences it. It asks you to surrender, not in despair, but in awe, because everything that is, including you, had to be. Error theory. Error theory is a quiet detonation at the heart of morality. It tells us that every time we say something is right or wrong, good or evil, we are making a mistake, not because we're hypocrites or liars, but because moral language itself is built on a false premise. The theory holds that our moral judgments pretend to state objective facts, but those facts don't exist. Morality, in this view, is a beautiful illusion, and every should we utter is an echo in an empty room. This is not moral relativism. It's far more brutal. Relativism says values are real, just different across cultures. Error theory says there are no moral facts. None. Not anywhere. So when someone says murder is wrong, they're speaking as if wrongness is a real property, like weight or color, but it's not. They're making a claim about the world that has no foundation, no anchor in reality, and yet we all keep doing it. That's the haunting part. We live as though morality were real. We cry for justice, punish cruelty, praise kindness. We shape our entire lives around these values. But if error theory is right, we are chasing ghosts, organizing society, loving people, waging wars over truths that were never there to begin with. And still, we feel them deeply, fiercely, the guilt, the rage, the hope. Error theory doesn't explain them away. It leaves them burning in silence, a kind of cosmic joke we can't stop believing. Because even if morality is an error, it's one we carry like a heartbeat we never chose and can't bear to lose. Speculative Realism. Speculative realism is a philosophical rupture, a scream against the smug cage of human-centered thinking. It doesn't ask for your comfort. It doesn't care if the world is knowable, manageable, or meaningful to you. It begins with a harsh, liberating premise. Reality exists entirely outside of human thought, and it doesn't need our minds to make it real. The world is not dependent on language, not sculpted by perception, not waiting for interpretation. It simply is, brutal, vast, and indifferent. For too long, philosophy wrapped itself in soft anthropocentrism, claiming we can't speak of the world without first speaking of ourselves, our consciousness, our categories, our experiences. Speculative realism tears that veil to pieces. It seeks the real that lies beyond us, beneath us, untouched by our sense-making. It insists that rocks would still be rocks, black holes would still collapse, stars would still burn, even if no mind ever rose to notice them. This worldview doesn't just decenter the human, it destabilizes it, because if the world doesn't revolve around us, then our meanings, our truths, our systems are local myths, not cosmic principles. You are not the reference point. You are a brief ripple in a reality that owes you nothing. And yet, speculative realism is not nihilism. It's confrontation. It's courage. It calls on us to face a world that will never fully unfold for us, to think beyond the bounds of thought, to imagine what it means for something to be real, even if it is forever withdrawn, alien, or unknowable. It is philosophy without apology, and it does not blink. Subjunctive realism. Subjunctive realism is a quiet detonation beneath the surface of possibility. It begins with a whisper most ignore. What could have been is as real as what is. This is not fantasy. It's not speculation. It's metaphysical seriousness about the could, the might, the would. It claims that possibilities, those fragile thoughts we often discard, are not just mental flickers. They have weight. They are real. Not real like tables or mountains, but real in their own mode of being. When you say, if she had stayed, things would be different, subjunctive realism answers, yes, truly different, truly real, just not actual. The world we live in is not alone. It sits within a vast terrain of alternatives, all shaped by their own logics, branching like roots through the soil of existence. These counterfactuals, what didn't happen but could have, exist independently of whether we imagine them. This view is unsettling because it breathes life into every door you didn't open, every word you didn't say, every life you didn't live. It tells you those paths weren't erased. They just didn't actualize here. But somewhere, in a metaphysical sense deeper than fiction, they still hold presence, not as illusions, as realities that never came to pass. Subjunctive realism doesn't just expand the world, it burdens it, because suddenly every decision echoes across a field of possibility that isn't empty, it's crowded. And you're not just haunted by regret or hope, you're haunted by the ontological weight of what almost was. Causal closure. Causal closure is a quiet doctrine with sharp edges. It draws a boundary around the physical universe and says, nothing gets in. Every physical event, from a supernova to the flick of your finger, has a physical cause. No ghosts, no souls, no immaterial whispers nudging atoms. The chain of cause and effect in the physical world is sealed tight, closed, absolute. It is a principle that feels cold because it is. It tells you that your thoughts, your intentions, your will, if they are to matter at all, must themselves be physical, or they are nothing. There is no room in this worldview for supernatural causation or non-physical minds moving matter. If something happens in your body, the explanation lies in neurons, hormones, biochemistry, not spirit, not consciousness floating free. The mental, if it means anything, must be physical too, or else it is just shadow play. This idea is the backbone of much of modern science and materialism, but its implications cut deeper than most dare to admit, because causal closure doesn't just exile miracles, it exiles meaning. If every movement is caused by prior physical movements, then where is you in that sequence? When you raise your hand, did you do it, or did physics, long before you had a say? And the silence that follows, that question can be unbearable. Causal closure is not an attack on wonder. It's the absence of it, a reality governed by law, not will, and in that stillness, you are left staring at your own thoughts, wondering if they move the world, or are simply passengers watching it pass. Supervaluationism. Supervaluationism is a philosophy that peers into the cracks of language and finds something terrifyingly unresolved. It exists to deal with vagueness, those blurry edges of thought where definitions fade and certainty slips away. What is a heap? When does bald begin? How old is young? We speak with these words every day, but their meanings leak at the borders. And supervaluationism tells us the world doesn't always provide a clean answer. It's not that the world is chaotic or that truth is dead. It's that in some cases, our concepts don't line up cleanly with reality. They stretch, they bend, they blur, and when they do, a statement like, "This person is bald," might be neither clearly true nor clearly false. But here is the strange brilliance. Supervaluationism says we can still preserve logic. Even if individual statements swim in uncertainty, some overarching structures remain valid. A sentence can be super true if it's true in all the precise ways you could define a vague term. So vagueness doesn't destroy truth. It just redefines how truth lives in language. Meaning becomes a dance of interpretations, many precise versions, each carving the vague boundary in a slightly different place. And truth emerges only where all those cuts agree. But this is not peace. It's a fragile order built over ambiguity. It reminds you that language is not a mirror of reality. It's a net, and some things will always slip through. And in that slippage, supervaluationism finds not a flaw, but the delicate heartbeat of how we think. Feminist standpoint theory is not just a call for inclusion. It is a demand to reconsider the starting point of truth itself. It claims that knowledge is not neutral, that objectivity has never been evenly distributed, and that those who are marginalized by gender, race, class, see the world not just differently, but more clearly in certain ways. From beneath the weight of power, they see the structures that those on top mistake for the natural order. Oppression is not just lived, it is observed, with a clarity that distance never allows. This theory insists that where you stand in the world shapes what you know. The perspective of a woman in a patriarchal society is not a distortion of truth. It is a lens that reveals what dominant narratives cannot see. The daily injustices, the unspoken rules, the invisible violence, all the things that power calls normal, are exposed from below. And so the standpoint of the oppressed becomes not just valid, but epistemically privileged in certain domains. But this is not a romanticization of suffering. It is a reckoning with who gets to define knowledge and why. It asks who is left out of the conversation when only the voices at the top are heard. It refuses to accept that objectivity comes from detachment. Sometimes the deepest truths come from being entangled, scarred, shaped, awakened by systems designed to silence you. Feminist standpoint theory doesn't ask to be let into the room. It asks whether the room itself was ever built to see clearly, and if not, whether the clearest vision begins from outside its walls. Virtue reliabilism. Virtue reliabilism offers a quiet, unsettling shift in how we understand knowledge. It doesn't ask whether your beliefs are justified in some airtight, logical way. It asks how you came to believe what you believe. It whispers that knowing isn't just about evidence. It's about you, about the kind of cognitive character you've developed, about whether your mind, like a well-crafted instrument, consistently leads you toward truth. According to virtue reliabilism, knowledge arises when beliefs are formed through intellectual virtues, traits like attentiveness, open-mindedness, intellectual courage, and careful reasoning, but not just traits for show. These virtues must be reliable, forged through habit and shaped by experience, capable of producing truth across time and circumstance. A lucky guess is not knowledge. A deeply flawed process that lands on truth by accident is not knowledge. It must come from a person who knows how to see clearly. This view is beautiful and merciless because it doesn't just say your beliefs must be true, it says you must be trustworthy. It pulls knowledge out of sterile logic and roots it in the soul of the knower. It makes knowledge personal, moral, earned. But what if your intellectual virtues have been shaped by a broken world? What if your mind has been trained to trust the wrong sources, follow false signals? Virtue reliabilism doesn't offer comfort. It demands self-examination because the question it asks isn't just, is this true? But am I the kind of person who deserves to believe it? And sometimes the answer cuts deeper than doubt. Metaphysical nihilism. Metaphysical nihilism is the quietest scream in philosophy. It doesn't argue for despair. It questions whether anything exists at all, not in a poetic, existential sense, but in the cold, precise logic of possibility. It asks, could there have been nothing? No stars, no atoms, no people, no space, just pure, absolute emptiness. Not a dark void, but no void at all. A world where existence never flickered into being, and the terrifying answer it proposes is yes. This isn't about the end of meaning. It's about the possibility that being itself could have been skipped entirely, that this universe, with all its galaxies and heartaches and coffee spoons, is not necessary, that nothingness could have been the default. And if that's true, then why is there something instead? Why this? Some versions of metaphysical nihilism even go further, suggesting that not only could there have been nothing, but that, in a very real way, nothingness is more plausible, that existence, in all its tangled, accidental complexity, is the weird exception, that the most natural state of reality is non-being, and we are living in the rare anomaly where something broke the silence. It's a thought that unravels the mind, because if there could have been nothing, no laws, no matter, no time, then the brute fact that you are here, reading this, is an ontological miracle, or an accident, or a mistake. Metaphysical nihilism doesn't tell you what to believe. It just leaves you staring into the raw possibility that all of this, everything, never had to be. Cognitivist Expressivism. Cognitivist Expressivism is a strange creature, a bridge built over fire, connecting two worlds that have long repelled each other. It begins with attention. When we say something like stealing is wrong, are we describing a fact or expressing a feeling? Are we philosophers or poets? Cognitivist Expressivism says both. That statement expresses an attitude and emotion, a stance, but it also claims to be true. Morality, in this view, is not just shouting into the void. It's trying to say something that matters. This hybrid theory walks a tightrope. On one side, pure expressivists say moral language is all emotion, no truth, no knowledge, just a kind of ethical music. On the other, moral realists say moral statements describe objective facts like gravity or biology. Cognitivist expressivism dares to hold both. Moral claims are expressive and cognitive. They come from the gut, but they aim for truth. It's a vulnerable position because it admits that our moral language is soaked in passion, shaped by culture, tangled in feeling, and yet it still insists that when we say racism is wrong, we're not just venting, we're pointing towards something real, something worth defending. But if morality is both felt and known, then every moral conversation becomes high stakes, not just a debate, but a revelation, a test of both reason and heart. Cognitivist expressivism forces us to confront ourselves, not just our logic, but our emotional sincerity. It doesn't ask what you believe, it asks why you feel that belief, and whether that feeling deserves to be called truth. Minimalism. Minimalism is a philosophical haunting. It opens the door to things that don't exist and insists they still somehow are. It begins with a simple observation that spirals into something uncanny. We can talk meaningfully about things that have no reality. The Golden Mountain, the round square, Sherlock Holmes, a perfect world. These things don't exist, but we understand them, describe them, fear them, love them. And Minimalism dares to say that understanding points to something real. For Austrian philosopher Alexius Meinong, what matters is not whether something exists in the physical or even abstract realm, but whether it can be targeted by thought. If we can think of it, speak of it, refer to it, it has a kind of being, not existence perhaps, but subsistence, a ghostly status, a shadow presence. It lives not in the world, but in the space of intentionality, what the mind reaches for. This idea breaks the neat boundary between real and unreal. It says that non-existent objects have properties. The golden mountain is golden and mountainous, even if there's no place to find it. The round square is logically impossible, yet we grasp the contradiction. Fictional characters have traits, emotions, relationships. They shape us, they hurt us, they linger. But if what doesn't exist can still be, then what are we living inside? Is reality just the narrow tip of an iceberg of impossible things? Are we surrounded by a universe of ideas that will never materialize, but remain patient, untouched, silently knowable? Meinongianism doesn't settle the question. It simply opens the door wider and whispers, not being is still a kind of being. Logical positivism. Logical positivism arrived like a thunderclap in the 20th century, sharp, uncompromising, and ready to burn centuries of metaphysics to the ground. It made one brutal demand: if a statement cannot be verified through sense experience or logical deduction, it is meaningless, not wrong, not debatable, meaningless. God, the soul, the infinite, moral truth, if you can't test it or prove it through logic, then it's philosophical noise. Beautiful maybe, haunting perhaps, but not knowledge. It was the rallying cry of the Vienna Circle, born out of a world broken by war and hungry for clarity. They wanted a philosophy that was clean, precise, scientific, no mysticism, no speculation, just verifiable facts and the logic to link them. Under this creed, metaphysics was not just misguided, it was intellectual pollution, a grand illusion that had wasted centuries of human thought. Logical positivism promised to purify philosophy, but the price was steep. Poetry, faith, ethics, aesthetics, all the things that make us human, were suddenly cast outside the walls of meaningful discourse. Beauty is eternal, and murder is wrong were treated no differently than fairy tales. Moving, maybe, but cognitively empty. And yet, that cold precision was seductive. It offered order in a chaotic world, but it also left a philosophical silence in its wake, because when you declare entire dimensions of human experience meaningless, what kind of world are you left with? A world of particles, formulas, and observations, but no soul, no wonder, no trembling beneath the surface. Logical positivism gave us clarity, but it may have done so by blinding us to what we cannot measure. Two-dimensional semantics. Two-dimensional semantics is a quiet act of philosophical surgery. It takes apart the meaning of language and reveals that beneath every word, every name, every statement, there are two maps running at once. One traces how meaning depends on what the world could be, the other on what the world actually is. Together, they explain how we can speak meaningfully even when we don't know all the facts. Together, they show how reference and meaning can shift without collapsing into confusion. Imagine you say, "Water is H2O." That sentence feels necessary, true in every possible world. But when the word water first appeared, people didn't know about molecules. They meant the clear, drinkable stuff in lakes and rivers. If the world had turned out differently, and the clear liquid had been something else, XYZ, not H2O, then water might have referred to that. That's the first dimension, meaning across possible worlds. The second dimension fixes the actual facts. Here, in this world, water is H2O, and now that's what the word truly refers to. Two-dimensional semantics maps both, the speaker's perspective when meaning is fluid, and the fixed point once reality sharpens into focus. It explains how statements can be both contingent and necessary, depending on which dimension you trace. But beneath the technical beauty lies something more profound. Our words, like us, evolve. Meaning isn't fixed in stone, it breathes through context, history, discovery. Every sentence we speak carries an echo of how the world might have been, and a reflection of how it is. Language, like thought, is always walking in two directions at once. Internalism, ethics. Internalism in ethics doesn't shout. It presses quietly on the deepest corners of the soul and asks, if you believe something is right, how could you not feel compelled to do it? It holds that moral judgments are not just cold statements, they are bound to motivation. If someone truly believes that helping a stranger is the right thing to do, internalism says they will feel something, a pull, a pressure, however faint, to act on it. And if they don't, maybe they never truly believed it to begin with. This view draws an intimate link between the head and the heart. It insists that morality is not just a matter of logic, but of fire. You cannot say I ought to with a straight face and then sit unmoved, detached, not without something breaking inside. Internalism reveals the fractures in those who preach virtue but act in silence. It asks how we live with ourselves when we claim to know right and still choose wrong. But this connection isn't comfortable because it means moral failure is more than a mistake. It's a kind of inner dishonesty, a dissonance, a contradiction between what we claim to know and what we are willing to feel. And it's this dissonance that internalism holds under the light. If you say stealing is wrong, but feel nothing as you take, then who are you really? If you say love matters, but walk away from pain, was the belief ever yours? Internalism doesn't measure morality by your words. It listens for the quiet echo of conviction in the choices you make when no one is watching. Disjunctivism. Disjunctivism is a fracture line drawn through the heart of perception, a bold claim that not all appearances are created equal. It tells you that seeing a tree and hallucinating a tree are not variations of the same experience dressed in different facts. They are fundamentally, ontologically different. One is a direct encounter with the world. The other is a lie with no anchor. To the disjunctivist, the difference isn't in the outcome, it's in the very nature of the experience. This view defies the comforting notion that perception is always inside, that what we see is just a mental image, filtered, maybe flawed, but functionally the same whether real or illusory. Disjunctivism tears that illusion apart. When you really see a tree, you are in contact with the world. Your mind reaches out and meets something real. When you hallucinate a tree, that connection is broken. There is no common element between the two. Just resemblance, just a trick. And that idea, quietly radical, reclaims reality from skepticism. It refuses to flatten true perception into a simulation. It insists that genuine experiences are richer, deeper, irreducible, that the world isn't just being represented to us, it's present. When you see someone you love, you are not watching a mental movie. You are with them, and when that experience is corrupted by illusion, by drugs, by dreams, you are not in a lesser version of the same thing. You are somewhere else entirely. Disjunctivism doesn't just describe perception. It draws a line between truth and its ghost, and it forces you to ask, when you open your eyes, what is really meeting you there? Bare particular theory. Bare particular theory is a strange and unsettling attempt to explain what makes a thing a thing. It begins with a simple but maddening question. What is the core of an object? What is it underneath all its properties? What is the thisness that makes this apple not just an apple, but this specific apple? The theory answers with something eerie. Every object is grounded in a bare particular, a featureless, propertyless core that serves as the metaphysical anchor for its traits. It is the part of the thing you can never see, never touch, never describe. Strip away the color, the shape, the weight, the taste, and there, in the silence beneath all qualities, is the bare particular, a mute presence, a placeholder for identity, not what the thing is, but that it is. Without it, properties would just float, redness, roundness, crispness, never bound together into an object. The bare particular holds the bundle together, even though it offers nothing of itself. But the mind recoils. How can something exist with no properties? How can there be a this with no content? And yet, the theory stares back unflinching. Something must unify the traits. Something must individuate, not by adding anything, but by being the silent core around which everything else gathers. It's a metaphysical ghost, haunting every object in the universe. You never encounter it, but without it, no thing would ever be this thing. And that realization lingers, because beneath every person, every object, every passing moment, there may be something utterly empty, holding everything together by being nothing at all. Contextualism in epistemology. Contextualism in epistemology is a soft-spoken revolution, one that doesn't change what we know, but how we know that we know. It says that knowledge isn't absolute, locked in logic, or frozen in time. It breathes, it bends, it shifts with the standards of the moment. According to contextualism, whether a person truly knows something depends on the context in which the question is asked. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You say, I know the bank will be open tomorrow. That feels true until someone asks, but how do you really know? What if the hours changed? Suddenly, the ground shifts. The standards rise. What counted as knowledge a second ago now trembles under the weight of a deeper doubt. And contextualism doesn't reject either moment. It embraces both, because it isn't what you know. It's how much certainty the moment demands. This philosophy dismantles the illusion that knowledge has one single threshold. It says that what we call knowing is entangled with unspoken expectations, background assumptions, unchallenged doubts. In casual settings, we're generous with knowledge. In high-stakes or skeptical contexts, we become relentless gatekeepers, and both are human, both are real. But there's something unsettling here, because if knowledge is context-sensitive, then truth starts to feel less like a mountain and more like a tide. What you're sure of at breakfast may dissolve by nightfall, not because you've changed, but because the question did. Contextualism leaves you standing in the flow, clutching your beliefs and asking, do I know this now, or only until someone dares to ask for more? Compatibilism. Compatibilism is the fragile bridge built between freedom and fate, a desperate attempt to keep hold of free will without tearing up the laws of nature. It stares directly into the face of determinism, into a world where every decision is shaped by prior causes, where neurons fire according to chemistry, and where every choice could have been predicted by a god with a big enough calculator. And yet, it still whispers, you are free. Not because you can defy causality, but because freedom isn't about escaping cause. It's about acting from who you are. If your desires, beliefs, and values led you to act, and no one forced your hand, then compatibilism says you acted freely, even if those desires were themselves shaped by things beyond your control. You didn't choose your childhood, your genetics, your fears, but if you act in line with them, with no external coercion, you are still the author of your action. It's a delicate philosophy, one that refuses to deny the laws of physics, but also refuses to accept that we are merely puppets. It asks us to rethink freedom, not as a cosmic blank slate, but as authenticity within necessity. You are free not when your choices are uncaused, but when they are yours. But that yours cuts deep, because if the self is just a chain of causes, then what are we clinging to? Compatibilism doesn't offer freedom in the grand, magical sense. It offers something smaller, more human, the dignity of owning your path, even if the path was always going to be walked. Pluralistic deontology. Pluralistic deontology doesn't offer a single shining rule. It offers a tangle of duties, conflicting, beautiful, and often heartbreaking. It tells us that morality isn't governed by one supreme principle like maximize happiness or always follow the law. Instead, it says there are many moral truths. Each one speaks in a different voice, and sometimes they speak over each other. To the pluralistic deontologist, there are duties to keep promises, to avoid harm, to be grateful, to seek justice, to protect the innocent, all binding, all real, all powerful. But life is messy, and these duties don't always play nice. What happens when telling the truth shatters a heart? What do you do when justice demands a promise be broken? There is no formula to solve that, no algorithm, only the trembling weight of judgment in the moment. This philosophy, shaped by thinkers like W.D. Ross, acknowledges the unbearable tension of moral life. It says we must make choices not by obeying a single rule, but by weighing our obligations, feeling their pull, recognizing their force, and choosing which duty is deepest in that moment. And in doing so, we are always vulnerable to failure. There is no guaranteed right move, only responsibility. That is the quiet power of pluralistic deontology. It reflects the world as it really is, fractured, complicated, full of competing goods. It honors the feeling that being moral isn't about certainty. It's about caring enough to carry the burden of choice, even when no answer feels clean, even when every path cuts a little. Dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism is philosophy lit on fire by history. It sees the world not as a collection of fixed truths, but as a battlefield of contradictions, matter in motion, struggle as the engine of change. It is the spine of Marxist thought, the worldview that says reality is not built from ideas or spiritual essences, but from material conditions, factories, hunger, class, power, and those conditions don't sit still. They collide, evolve, and explode through conflict. Everything in this vision is shaped by contradiction, rich versus poor, worker versus owner, oppression versus resistance. Society is not a stable structure, but a living process, a dialectic, where forces clash, and out of that clash, a new order emerges. Thesis meets antithesis, and through their struggle, a synthesis is born. But even that synthesis carries new tensions, new seeds of collapse. Nothing is permanent. Change is not an exception. It is the law. This is not just theory. It is callous, revolutionary philosophy. It tells you that ideology grows from material roots, that culture, religion, even morality are shaped by who controls the means of survival, that ideas are not neutral. They serve someone. And if you want to understand the soul of a society, you must follow its money, its labor, its chains. Dialectical materialism does not offer peace. It offers motion, a relentless forward churn. It whispers that injustice is not a glitch. It is the fuel, and only through the fire of contradiction can something new be born. You cannot think your way out of it. You have to struggle, because history is not waiting to be understood. It is waiting to erupt. Hylomorphism. Hylomorphism is an ancient whisper echoing through modern thought, a vision of reality that refuses to split body from soul, matter from meaning. Born from the mind of Aristotle, it offers a world not made of just stuff, and not just of spirit, but of a deep unity. Everything is formed matter. Every object, every living thing is a fusion of two inseparable elements, hyle, the raw potential of matter, and morphe, the shaping force that gives it identity. A statue is not just marble, it is marble shaped as a form. A human is not just flesh, nor just soul. We are matter animated by form, living potential structured by purpose. Remove the form, and you are left with a corpse. Remove the matter, and there is nothing to see or touch. Hylomorphism insists you can't have one without the other. Form without matter is a ghost. Matter without form is chaos. This view feels quiet on the surface, but it hums with spiritual tension because it doesn't simply describe objects, it describes being itself. You are not a soul trapped in a body. You are a living unity. And this unity resists the dualisms that haunt Western philosophy: mind versus body, material versus spiritual, nature versus meaning. In a world of fragmentation, hylomorphism offers a strange comfort that substance is not flat and spirit is not floating, that form and matter hold each other like breath and body, like word and meaning. And when you begin to see the world this way, you start to wonder what unseen form is shaping you right now, and how close is your raw potential to becoming real. Natural kind, essentialism. Natural kind essentialism is a deep craving for order in a world that never stops shifting. It begins with a powerful, almost ancient hope that things in nature come with real, discoverable essences. That gold is gold because of something in its nature. That water is not just a label we slap on a liquid, but a substance defined by what it is at its core. H2O, unchanging, universal. This view says natural kinds, like elements, species, or biological functions, aren't human inventions. They are carved into the bones of the universe. It's a seductive thought that behind the chaos of appearances, there is a structure, that a tiger is not just a collection of cells or a fuzzy predator, but something with an essence that makes it a tiger and not a slightly striped house cat. We don't invent these categories. We discover them. They exist whether or not we notice, whether or not we agree. But this idea also carries weight, because if essences are real, then so are boundaries, and those boundaries are not up to us. They whisper a deeper order we are bound to obey. There is no negotiation with what something is. There is only recognition. And yet, in a world of genetic mutations, fluid identities, shifting climates, and engineered life, the idea of fixed essences starts to feel like a haunting. Are we seeing what is, or clinging to what we need to be true? Natural kind essentialism offers clarity, but at the cost of complexity. It offers truth, but sometimes at the expense of becoming. Pragmatic encroachment. Pragmatic encroachment is a quiet bomb dropped into the foundation of knowledge. It tells us that knowing isn't just about evidence, it's about stakes. The higher the consequences, the higher the standards. What counts as knowing something in a casual conversation may not count when the cost of being wrong becomes unbearable. And this shakes our trust in knowledge as something cold, clean, and objective. You might say, I know the bank is open on Saturday. That feels safe until your entire rent payment hangs on it. Suddenly, doubt creeps in, not because the facts change, but because the practical risk did. According to pragmatic encroachment, that change in stakes matters. It pushes into the boundary of your knowledge and redefines it. This idea is deeply unsettling because it suggests that knowledge is not sealed off from emotion, urgency, or real-world pressure. It bends. It flexes under weight. It means your ability to truly know is partly shaped by how much it would hurt to be wrong. And if this is true, then every claim to knowledge carries hidden ethical weight. Knowing isn't just about belief in truth. It's about responsibility. It asks, what's riding on this? What's the cost of confidence? What's the price of error? Pragmatic encroachment forces you to see knowledge not as a light switch, but as a live wire, charged by context, danger, and consequence. You don't just ask, is this true? You ask, can I afford for it not to be? And suddenly, the ground beneath your certainties starts to tremble. Nozick's tracking theory. Nozick's tracking theory is a razor drawn through the heart of what it means to know. It doesn't care if your belief is true by luck or if you stumble blindly into the right answer. It demands something deeper, connection. According to Robert Nozick, you know something if your belief tracks the truth across nearby possibilities, not just in this world, but in the close ones, the almost worlds where things could have gone differently. It's not enough to believe something true. Your belief must respond to reality. If the fact were false, you wouldn't believe it. If the fact were true, you would. Your belief must move with the truth, like a compass needle following magnetic pull. That's what it means to track. It's not static, it's sensitive, it's alive. Imagine believing the murderer is in the basement, and they are. But if they weren't, you'd still think they were. That's not knowledge, says Nozick. That's coincidence. Knowledge in this view isn't a photograph. It's a shadow that changes shape with the truth. But this idea is brutal because it means knowledge isn't safe. It's fragile. One step into the wrong nearby world, and what you thought you knew vanishes. Nozick forces you to see belief as dynamic, as vulnerable, as something that can only count as knowledge when it's stitched tightly to reality, not just here, but almost everywhere you could have ended up. And once you grasp that, you feel it, the trembling uncertainty behind every confident claim, because to really know something means to risk being wrong in every world where the truth slips just slightly away. Reformed epistemology. Reformed epistemology is a bold, unsettling claim tucked in the robes of faith. You don't need proof to believe in God, not evidence, not arguments, not syllogisms, just belief itself. It says that belief in God can be properly basic, justified, without being built on anything else, like your belief in the external world, or the reality of the past, or the presence of other minds. You just know, and that knowing stands on its own. This isn't a retreat from reason, it's a reimagining of it. Thinkers like Alvin Plantinga argue that some beliefs don't come from logic, but from the way our minds are designed to function. You see a tree, you believe in a tree, you feel the weight of guilt or the pull of the divine, and belief in God may arise just as naturally. No argument necessary, no rational scaffolding required. But this idea is dangerous. It cuts against the grain of secular scrutiny. It says the believer doesn't have to answer the skeptic on their terms. It says faith can be rational without having to prove itself. And in doing so, it opens a door for belief that the modern world keeps trying to close. At its core, Reformed epistemology is not about winning debates. It's about the legitimacy of trust, deep, intuitive, unprovable trust in something greater. And once you let that in, the ground shifts. Because if some truths can be felt without being argued, then maybe not everything worth believing comes with a receipt. Maybe some certainties are born, not built. Non-reductive physicalism. Non-reductive physicalism lives in a strange tension, one foot planted in the hard ground of physics, the other reaching toward the elusive heights of consciousness, thought, and meaning. It says everything that exists is, at its core, physical. There is no soul floating above neurons, no mental ghost steering the machine. And yet, it also says the mind cannot be reduced to mere particles and laws. Your sadness, your hope, your memory of your mother's voice, these are not illusions. They are real, and they matter, even if they arise from matter. This philosophy doesn't flinch from the authority of science, but it refuses to flatten the world into lifeless mechanics. It says, yes, your brain is made of cells and signals, but those cells give rise to a mind that plays by different rules. You can't explain love with chemistry, even if chemistry makes love possible. You can map the brain, but you can't collapse meaning into molecules. Non-reductive physicalism demands that we see both levels, the physical base and the emergent reality it creates. Mental states supervene on physical ones. They depend on them, but they are not identical to them. A painting is made of pigments and canvas, but the beauty is not found in the atoms. It rises from the arrangement, the interpretation, the experience, and in that space between matter and mind, this philosophy lives, restless, conflicted, and deeply human. It says you are physical, yes, but never just physical. You are a pattern in the flesh, a thought stitched into the body, something that science can explain, but never completely contain. Semantic externalism. Semantic externalism is a quiet betrayal of what we think it means to know what we mean. It tells you that the meanings of your words, your thoughts, even the ones that feel most personal, are not fully inside your head. They reach beyond you, shaped by the world, the environment, the community you're part of. According to this view, you can't fully possess the meaning of what you're saying without the world playing its part. You might think that when you say water, you know exactly what you mean, but if you were raised on a planet where the clear, drinkable liquid was made not of H2O, but of XYZ, you'd still call it water, still think you were referring to the same thing, and yet you wouldn't be. The chemical essence, the external truth, changes the meaning, even though your thoughts and language feel exactly the same. That's the haunting insight. Meaning isn't just in your mind. It's in the connection between your mind and the world. Semantic externalism says that our mental content is incomplete without context, that what we mean depends on what surrounds us, language use, causal history, the environment we didn't choose. You are never the sole author of your own thoughts. You are co-writing them with the world. And that truth feels like a loss of sovereignty. If meaning doesn't live entirely inside you, how much of what you think you understand is truly yours? You speak with confidence, you think with conviction, but part of what you mean was never up to you. Dual aspect theory. Dual aspect theory is a haunting middle path, drawn between the mind and the body, the mental and the physical, without letting either one claim dominion. It says there is not two things, mind and matter, but one thing, seen in two ways, a single reality glimpsed through different lenses. What looks like thought from the inside looks like brain activity from the outside. Your joy is not separate from the firing of neurons, but it is not reducible to it either. They are two faces of the same coin, forever bound, never interchangeable. This idea doesn't deny the physical world, nor does it cling to a disembodied mind. It stands at the threshold between them and says, what if this divide is only in our perspective? What if the deep reality behind everything isn't mental or material, but something deeper, stranger, beyond those categories? And when we look inward, we see experience. When we look outward, we see form. But what we're really seeing is the same thing, split by the limits of our gaze. Dual aspect theory refuses to let go of the mystery. It does not solve the mind-body problem. It preserves it. It suggests that trying to explain one side in terms of the other is like trying to taste a color or hear a thought. They are co-reflections, each revealing part of a whole we cannot fully grasp. And once you feel that, once you realize your consciousness is not separate from the world, but not swallowed by it either, you begin to understand. You are not a ghost in the machine. You are the machine and the ghost, flickering into reality as one. Two-level utilitarianism. Two-level utilitarianism is a moral double life. It tells you that to live ethically in this messy, unpredictable world, you must think in two modes, fast and slow, instinctive and reflective, rule-bound and calculating. It begins with the truth utilitarians have always carried, that the right action is the one that maximizes happiness, well-being, utility, but it adds a painful layer of wisdom. You can't live that way all the time. Why? Because pure, act-by-act utilitarianism is exhausting, paralyzing, and often impossible in real life. Should you save money or give it away, lie to spare someone pain, or tell the truth and risk harm? Think of every possible consequence, weigh every outcome. It's too much. The mind buckles under the weight of constant moral math. So, two-level utilitarianism, pioneered by R.M. Hare, offers a compromise that feels like a secret pact. On the intuitive level, you follow well-established rules. Be honest, keep promises, don't harm others, rules that, over time, have proven to produce good consequences in most situations. They're not sacred, they're shortcuts, survival maps in the moral wilderness. But in rare, high-stakes moments, on the critical level, you step back, you drop the rules, you calculate, you ask, what truly brings the best result right now? even if that means breaking everything you usually live by. And that tension never disappears. It splits the soul because it means that sometimes being good means following rules, and sometimes being good means breaking them. The tragedy is you won't always know which level you're in until it's too late to choose again. Speech Act Theory. Speech Act Theory is a quiet revolution in how we understand language. It says that when we speak, we don't just describe the world, we do things. Words are not merely containers for facts. They are tools, weapons, bridges. When someone says, "I promise," they're not reporting a mental state. They're creating an obligation. When a judge says, "I sentence you," they're not commenting on reality. They're changing it. Speech doesn't just reflect reality. It acts on it. At its core, this theory draws attention to the performative power of language. When you apologize, forgive, warn, insult, invite, declare love, you're not stating truths. You're making moves. Language is not passive. It's kinetic, alive, a force that shapes relationships, expectations, social structures. Every conversation is a choreography of intentions wrapped in sound. But the weight of this theory grows heavier the longer you sit with it, because if words can act, they can also wound, bind, liberate, deceive. A simple phrase can fracture trust or mend it. A whisper can start a war. A silence can scream. Speech Act Theory demands that we stop seeing language as just a means of communication and start seeing it as a medium of power. And that changes everything, because it means your voice is never neutral. Every word you speak carries consequence, whether you intend it or not, and every promise, threat, compliment, or insult is not just a message, it's an action. Spoken reality is real reality, and once you realize that, you never speak quite the same way again. Structural Realism. Structural realism is a cold, elegant philosophy, a survival strategy for truth in a world that keeps changing its mind. It rises from the ashes of scientific revolutions, asking how we can trust any theory when history shows us they always fall. Yesterday's truths, phlogiston, absolute space, ether, are today's myths. So what if anything survives? Structural realism answers, the structure does. It says we may never know the true nature of reality, the deep stuff behind the curtain, but we can know how things relate, how particles interact, how forces behave, how systems move. What science gives us is not a portrait of reality's essence, but a blueprint of its architecture. The furniture may change, the names may evolve, but the relationships, the equations, the patterns, the structure persist. That's what's real. This view offers a strange kind of comfort. It allows us to believe in progress without pretending we've reached the end. It holds on to realism without clinging to metaphysical illusions. But it also cuts deep because it tells us the world may always be partly hidden. You don't get to know the things themselves. You get to know how they fit together. Structural realism makes you rethink everything you thought you understood. Maybe electrons aren't things with little essences. Maybe they're just nodes in a web of relations. Maybe you too are not a thing, but a structure, a role in a network of causes, thoughts, histories. And suddenly, the world doesn't feel like a place full of objects. It feels like a rhythm, a code, a dance of connections in which the dancers may vanish, but the choreography remains. Agent causation theory. Agent causation theory is a defiant stand against the idea that you are just a link in the chain of cause and effect, a product of particles and past events. It says, you are not merely caused, you cause, not as a collection of neurons firing in a predetermined pattern, but as a being, a self, an agent who initiates actions from within. In a universe where everything seems pushed forward by prior forces, this theory carves out a sacred space, the will. Most causal theories see actions as outcomes of earlier events. Your genetics, your upbringing, your brain states. You raise your hand because neurons fired. because stimuli triggered memories, because the past left you no other path. But agent causation says no. You raise your hand because you chose to, not because of something that happened to you, but because of something that happened through you. This is not just about freedom, it's about responsibility, because if you are an agent cause, then your choices are not echoes, they are origins. You are not a puppet moved by invisible strings, you are the hand. And that idea is both terrifying and electric, because it means you are not hidden behind excuses. The pain you inflict, the kindness you offer, the silence you keep, they begin with you, not your chemistry, not your culture. You. Agent causation theory doesn't offer comfort. It offers weight, the weight of being a true origin in a universe that prefers inertia, the weight of knowing that when you act, something new enters the world, and it wears your name. Transcendental Idealism. Transcendental Idealism is a philosophy of shattered illusions, rebuilt into quiet dignity. At its heart lies a single jarring truth. We never experience the world as it is, only as it appears to us. Immanuel Kant, its architect, didn't say the world isn't real. He said we can never reach it directly. The things in themselves, the true nature of reality, lie forever beyond our grasp. What we know is the phenomenal world, shaped and filtered by the structures of our own mind. Space and time, not properties of the universe. They are lenses we wear, built into our cognition. Causality, not an external truth, but a rule our mind imposes on experience to make sense of it. We don't see the world, we see a version of it that our minds construct. Transcendental Idealism doesn't deny the real. It tells us that reality, as we know it, is a co-creation between mind and mystery. And this breaks something inside, because it means our deepest sense of objectivity is built on scaffolding we never chose. That when you see a tree, you are not just seeing a tree, you are seeing a tree as your mind lets you. That the raw world, the noumenal world, could be unimaginably strange, and we would never know. Yet in this tragic humility, there is also a strange power. It means we are not passive observers. We are active participants in experience itself. The world you know is not just given, it is shaped by your presence in it. And that means that even if the truth is unreachable, the act of seeking still matters. Naive realism. Naive realism is the belief we all quietly carry before philosophy shakes it loose. The feeling that when you open your eyes, you're seeing the world as it really is. The colors, the shapes, the sounds, the textures, they aren't inside your mind. They're out there, waiting to be seen, touched, heard. According to naive realism, perception is not a filtered construction or mental representation. It's a direct encounter. You see the tree not as an image in your head, but as the tree itself, standing in the light. It is called naive, not to mock it, but because it is innocent. It trusts the senses. It trusts the world. It tells us that what we perceive is the truth, that the veil between our mind and reality is so thin it might as well not exist. And yet, this simplicity carries a kind of beauty, because it means we are in contact with the real, not trapped in a simulation, not locked behind cognitive screens. When you look at someone you love, naive realism whispers, you are not seeing a mental copy. You are seeing them. Their eyes, their smile, their sorrow, real, right there, present. But that clarity trembles when challenged. Illusions, hallucinations, dreams. Philosophy brings in its sharp tools and cuts the confidence. Are you seeing what's there, or just what your brain paints for you? And still, naive realism lingers, stubborn and unshaken in how we live. It is not what we prove, it is what we feel, that the world is real and that we are touching it every time we open our eyes. Theological non-cognitivism. Theological non-cognitivism doesn't argue against God. It questions whether the word God means anything at all. It doesn't doubt a divine being. It doubts the very coherence of the language we use to talk about one. When someone says, God exists, the non-cognitivist hears a sound, reverent, emotional, maybe powerful, but not a meaningful proposition, not true or false, just empty. This is not atheism. Atheism says God does not exist. Theological non-cognitivism says, what exactly are you talking about? What is God? Omnipotent, infinite, beyond time, pure spirit? These terms collapse under scrutiny. They drift into abstractions so vast, they stop pointing to anything specific. It's like asking whether the color blue is married or whether silence weighs 10 pounds. The statement isn't wrong, it's nonsensical. This view is deeply unsettling because it doesn't confront belief. It erases the battlefield altogether. It refuses to treat theology like a debate about facts because in its eyes, the language of theology has never met the basic threshold of meaning. It sees centuries of argument built on foundations made of fog. And that leaves you with a kind of philosophical vertigo. If the central word of religion lacks meaning, what happens to prayer, to worship, to doubt, to hope? If God is a hollow symbol filled with personal emotion but no logical content, then maybe the deepest human longings have always spoken a language that doesn't translate. Theological non-cognitivism doesn't mock belief. It simply wonders, what if we've never really known what we were saying? Eco-philosophy. Eco-philosophy is not a theory. It is a reckoning, a cry rising from forests torn down, oceans choking, skies burning. It begins with a truth that cuts deeper than science, that the earth is not a backdrop to human history. It is a being in its own right, and we are not separate from it. We are woven into its breath, its decay, its pulse. Eco-philosophy demands that we rethink not just how we treat the environment, but how we understand ourselves in relation to it. This worldview rejects the old story, that nature is raw material, that value begins with human use, that progress means mastery. It looks at the way we've built our cities, our economies, our ideologies, and sees a wound disguised as civilization. It does not simply ask for sustainability, it asks for humility, a spiritual shift, a philosophical unlearning of our place at the center. Eco-philosophy insists that ethics must expand, that rivers, animals, ecosystems have a kind of voice, a kind of moral presence we've learned to ignore. It tells us that to destroy a rainforest is not just a political choice, it's a metaphysical crime, not because of what we lose, but because of what we fail to recognize, that life is a shared condition, not a hierarchy. And once you begin to see the earth not as scenery, but as kin, everything changes. Your body feels less like a possession and more like borrowed soil. Your breath, a thread in a living web. And somewhere deep inside, the question begins to burn. What does the earth feel when we forget it exists? Second-person ethics. Second-person ethics doesn't speak in the abstract. It looks you in the eyes. It says you, not one, not people, not agents, you. It isn't built from universal rules or distant calculations. It begins in the charged space between two individuals, one demanding, one accountable. It is the moral weight of the word you owe me, not because of a law, but because I am here and I matter to you. This philosophy, championed by thinkers like Stephen Darwall, shifts the entire moral lens. It doesn't ask, what maxim could everyone follow, or what action will create the most good? It asks, what do we owe each other, face to face, voice to voice? It locates morality in the moment of recognition, in the experience of being called out, held responsible, expected to answer, not to the universe, but to someone. Second-person ethics feels different because it hurts different. It's not guilt from violating a rule. It's the sting of letting someone down. It's not the fear of punishment. It's the ache of having broken trust. It is personal, binding, alive. The command doesn't come from outside. It comes from me to you, and it demands something more than obedience. It demands acknowledgement. And once you've felt that look, the one that says, "How could you?" you understand. Morality isn't an equation. It's a relationship. You are not just a moral agent. You are a participant in the lives of others. And in that connection lies the terrifying, beautiful truth. Someone sees you. Someone expects something from you. And that matters. Hermeneutic circle. The hermeneutic circle is not a method. It is a mirror, one that reflects how we understand anything at all. It begins with a paradox that feels like a trap. To understand the whole, you must understand the parts. But to understand the parts, you must already understand the whole. It's a loop, a spiral, a dance of interpretation where meaning is never fixed, never final, always unfolding between what you expect and what you discover. When you read a sentence, you bring assumptions about language, about context, about intent. Those assumptions shape how you interpret each word, but each word also reshapes your understanding of the whole. You are constantly moving back and forth, refining, revising, re-seeing. The hermeneutic circle is not a flaw in understanding. It is understanding. Interpretation is not linear. It is recursive, 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 again and again until something clicks or refuses to. This doesn't just apply to texts. It applies to people, to culture, to memory. You cannot understand a person's pain without seeing their story, but you cannot understand their story without hearing the pain in their voice. Meaning is a fragile negotiation between expectation and experience, always haunted by what you've known before. And that's where it pierces deepest, because it means we never enter anything neutral. We bring our baggage, our history, our language, our fears, and every time we try to understand the world, we risk seeing only what confirms us. The hermeneutic circle asks not just how you interpret, but who you are as you do, and whether you're willing to let what you find change the one who's searching. Phenomenological psychopathology. Phenomenological psychopathology doesn't try to fix madness. It listens to it. It doesn't begin with brain scans or diagnostic labels. It begins with experience, raw, fractured, often unspeakable experience. It asks, what does the world feel like when you're depressed, paranoid, manic, dissociated? What does it mean to exist when the basic textures of reality, time, space, identity, other people, become unfamiliar, hostile, or broken? This field merges philosophy and psychiatry, not to explain away suffering, but to understand its shape from within. It draws from phenomenology, the study of conscious experience, to say that mental illness is not just a malfunction. It's a way of being in the world that has gone off axis. When someone is deeply depressed, it's not just that they're sad. Time slows, the future vanishes, colors fade, even gravity feels heavier. Reality itself changes, and when someone is psychotic, the world might become terrifyingly alive, hyper-meaningful, or grotesquely hollow. Phenomenological psychopathology dares to take those inner worlds seriously, not as delusions to be dismissed, but as worlds to be entered and described. It sees the person not as a broken machine, but as a subject in crisis, someone navigating a collapsing sense of self or an overwhelming shift in meaning. And in doing so, it asks something profound and unsettling. What if madness isn't a total departure from humanity, but a distorted echo of truths we all carry? What if the line between sanity and illness is not a wall, but a trembling thread? This isn't just theory, it's a kind of witness. It hears the scream beneath the silence and doesn't look away. Minimal state theory. Minimal state theory stands like a sentinel at the edge of political philosophy, stripped of idealism, wary of power. It says the state should do only what it must, and no more. Its purpose is not to make people moral, equal, or fulfilled. Its role is singular, to protect individual rights, to prevent force, fraud, theft, to enforce contracts. That's it. Everything beyond that, welfare, education, cultural uplift is overreach. Even when done with good intentions, it risks becoming coercion disguised as care. This vision, most famously championed by Robert Nozick, feels cold at first. It offers no grand promises, no utopia, no collective salvation, but beneath its austerity lies a deep reverence for autonomy. It believes that individuals are not tools of the state or instruments of someone else's vision of the good life. You own your life, your time, your talents. To force you to serve a cause, even a noble one, is to deny your humanity. And yet, that clarity cuts. It means the state should not feed the hungry, house the poor, or correct inequality, because doing so would require taking from others without consent. Justice in this view is not about outcomes. It's about respecting the process, how people come to own what they have, not whether the final result looks fair. It's a philosophy that appeals to those who fear the quiet violence of bureaucracies that claim to help, but it leaves a shadow behind. What happens to those who fall through the cracks? Minimal state theory doesn't answer that. It just says it's not the state's place to decide who gets carried and who must walk alone. Skeptical theism. Skeptical theism is not a denial of God. It is a denial of us, our perspective, our reach, our right to judge divine silence. It begins with one of the oldest, deepest wounds in human thought. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why is there so much suffering, so much horror? Why do children die screaming? Why do the faithful rot in war, disease, betrayal? The problem of evil cuts to the bone, and skeptical theism answers not with comfort, but with limits. It says, we are not in a position to understand God's reasons. We should not expect to see the whole picture. Our minds, small and finite, can't grasp the infinite calculus of a divine plan. Just because we can't imagine a reason for the suffering doesn't mean one doesn't exist. Our moral intuitions, though powerful, are not the measuring stick of the universe. This is not a soothing answer. It pulls the rug out from our desire for clarity, for justice that makes sense. It asks us to accept brutal mystery, to trust that behind every unanswered prayer and every unbearable tragedy, there could be a reason, even if we never learn it, even if we die with the question still bleeding in our chest. But that trust comes at a cost, because if God's reasons are unknowable, then how do we know when to trust our conscience? If we cannot see the divine logic in genocide, abuse, or despair, how do we know we're not just excusing the inexcusable? Skeptical theism doesn't close the wound. It says the wound may be deeper than we can comprehend, and that faith might mean living inside it without relief. Verificationism. Verificationism is a blade sharpened by early 20th century philosophers who were done with metaphysics, mysticism, and abstract speculation. It slices away anything that cannot be tested, touched, or observed. According to verificationism, a statement only means something if it can be verified through experience, experiment, or empirical evidence. If a claim cannot be confirmed or denied by observation, it is not false, it is meaningless. Say, God exists. Say, the soul is eternal. Say, reality is an illusion. To the verificationist, these aren't just controversial, they're linguistic illusions, masquerading as truth while signifying nothing. The only meaningful statements are those you can check. Water boils at 100 degrees. The car is red. The moon has craters. If you can't show it, measure it, or at least imagine what would prove it wrong, throw it out. Language is not a playground. It is a tool, and verificationism polices its edges like a silent judge. Born from logical positivism, this view tried to remake philosophy in the image of science, clean, exact, stripped of metaphysical excess. But in doing so, it left something hollow in its wake, because so much of what matters, love, morality, beauty, fear, consciousness, resists the laboratory, and verificationism, in its brutal clarity, leaves those things at the door. It is a philosophy that dares to ask, does this statement even deserve to be believed? And in that question, it reveals both its strength and its wound, because it can silence lies, but it can also silence longing. It protects meaning by burning the words we use to dream. Deleuzian ontology. Deleuzian ontology doesn't ask what is, it asks what flows, what becomes, what bursts through the cracks of identity and structure. For Gilles Deleuze, reality is not a world of static beings, fixed categories, or clear boundaries. It is a pulsing chaos of difference, transformation, and intensity. Everything is in motion. Everything is becoming something else. The universe isn't built. It's unfolding, endlessly, wildly, without final form. In this view, identity is a trap. Categories are violence. Being is a dull illusion. What matters is difference, not as a contrast between two things, but as the very engine of reality. A child becoming an adult, a thought becoming a movement, a body becoming desire. These are not steps on a ladder. They are explosions of potential. Life, to Deleuze, is not about reaching a form. It's about escaping it. Deleuzian ontology introduces strange and beautiful concepts: rhizomes instead of trees, multiplicities instead of unities, machines instead of souls. A rhizome spreads without hierarchy. A multiplicity has no essence, only connections. A body is not sacred. It's a machine of sensations, organs, flows, and yourself, not a stable identity, but a shifting landscape of impulses and intensities. You are always in the middle of becoming something else, something stranger. This philosophy doesn't want to define the world. It wants to release it. It doesn't want to explain you. It wants to liberate you from systems, from sameness, from the prison of what you're told you are. Deleuzian ontology doesn't just describe reality. It ignites it, and in its fire, all certainty melts. Anti-realism in mathematics. Anti-realism in mathematics is a quiet mutiny against certainty. It whispers what few dare to, that numbers, sets, and infinities might not exist out there, waiting to be discovered like planets or fossils. They might be inventions, not revelations. According to mathematical anti-realism, math is not a window into an abstract, eternal realm. It's a tool we built to make sense of the world, a language of structure, not a map of a hidden universe. To the anti-realist, 2 + 2 = 4 is not true in some absolute transcendent way. It is true within the framework we created, consistent, powerful, indispensable, but still ours. There is no invisible realm where perfect triangles hover, no platonic heaven where irrational numbers drift like stars. There are only symbols, rules, and the astonishing usefulness they've given us. And that usefulness is the paradox, because math works. It explains the cosmos, powers your smartphone, predicts the path of planets. But anti-realism looks that success in the eye and asks, does working mean it's real? Or have we just built a model so tightly woven with our minds that it feels like truth? This view is unsettling. It tells us the deepest structures we trust, the ones we build physics on, logic on, reason itself, might not describe what is, but only what fits. And if math is not found, but made, then the universe is not whispering numbers to us. We're whispering them to ourselves and mistaking the echo for something eternal. Four-dimensionalism. Four-dimensionalism is a quiet annihilation of how we think about time and ourselves. It tells you that you are not just who you are right now. You are a long, stretched-out entity through time, a space-time worm made up of every moment you've ever lived and every moment you ever will live. Past you, present you, future you, they all exist. They're all equally real. You don't move through time. You are extended within it. This view treats time not as a flowing river, but as a frozen landscape. You don't pass through moments like a train through stations. You are the whole track. The child you were still exists. So does the person you'll become. Change is not the movement from one moment to another. Change is just a difference between slices of your temporal self. It sounds abstract until it isn't, because if your future is as real as your past, then every mistake, every heartbreak, every triumph is not just memory or hope. It is. Somewhere in the block universe, you are always falling in love, always losing someone, always being born, always dying. There is no privilege now, just different coordinates in space-time. And that realization is dizzying. It collapses the illusion that the future is open, that the past is gone, that only this moment is real. It forces you to see your life not as a flame flickering through time, but as a sculpture carved from it, complete, unchanging, eternal. Four-dimensionalism doesn't ask you to seize the moment. It tells you the moment has already been seized and will be forever. Justificationism. Justificationism is the deep-rooted instinct we're all taught to trust, the idea that belief becomes knowledge only when it's backed by good reasons. You must justify what you claim to know. Without a solid foundation of evidence, argument, or logic, your belief is just floating, untethered, unearned, suspect. Justification is the ladder that lifts belief into the light of reason. This view, ancient and intuitive, lies at the heart of classical epistemology. It says we must give grounds for our beliefs, clear, defensible reasons that survive scrutiny. You believe the bridge will hold? Then show the engineering. You believe someone is guilty? Then bring the evidence. To believe without justification is to gamble with truth. But as clear as it sounds, justificationism hides a brutal demand. What justifies the justification? And then what justifies that? You fall into a chain with no clear end, each reason needing a reason, each proof begging for another proof. It either leads to an infinite regress, a dead stop in circular logic, or a leap of faith. And suddenly, your precious certainty starts to crack. Some, like Karl Popper, turned against justificationism entirely, calling it an illusion, preferring falsification, testing, and criticism instead of an unreachable bedrock. But for many, justificationism still feels like the gold standard of rationality. A belief must earn its right to be called knowledge. It is a noble idea, a disciplined one, but also a fragile one, because behind every claim it asks, why do you believe this? And behind that question, it quietly waits with another. How far down are you willing to go before the ladder disappears? Negative utilitarianism. Negative utilitarianism is not about happiness. It's about suffering, and it doesn't whisper, it pleads. It says the moral weight of the world isn't found in how much joy we can create, but in how much pain we can stop. Where classical utilitarianism dreams of maximizing pleasure, negative utilitarianism lies awake at night asking how to minimize horror. Its compass doesn't point toward delight, it points away from agony. This philosophy stares unflinching into the worst parts of existence, torture, starvation, loneliness, despair, and says, this is where morality must begin. It believes that suffering carries a moral urgency, pleasure simply doesn't. No one's joy can outweigh someone else's scream. No amount of laughter justifies even a single moment of genuine torment. And that idea is as compassionate as it is terrifying, because once you accept it, the world becomes unbearable. If the goal is to reduce suffering as much as possible, then how far are we willing to go? Do we sacrifice some for the many? Do we stop creating life to prevent future pain? Would the end of sentient existence itself be a moral triumph, an escape from the possibility of hurt? These are not rhetorical questions. Negative utilitarianism dares to ask them seriously. This isn't a philosophy of despair, it's a philosophy of mercy, stretched to its logical extreme, and that extreme is hard to look at because it forces you to confront suffering not as a side effect, but as the central enemy, and it asks you, if your joy is built on someone else's pain, is it still worth it? Illocutionary act theory. Illocutionary act theory is the moment language stops being description and starts being action. It tells us that when you speak, you're not just transferring information, you're doing something. When you promise, you bind yourself. When you apologize, you submit. When you declare, you shift the air in the room. Words are not just tools of thought, they are instruments of force. Born from the work of J.L. Austin and later expanded by John Searle, this theory slices language into layers. There's the sentence itself, the literal content, I will call you tomorrow. But beneath that is the illocutionary force, the act you're performing by saying it, a promise, a threat, a reassurance. It's not about what you say, but what you mean to do by saying it. And meaning here is not just thought, it's intention in motion. Illocution is the heartbeat of human connection. It's how we shape each other's expectations, navigate trust, build relationships, or quietly manipulate. You don't ask someone to marry you with a scientific observation. You do it with an act clothed in words. And whether it succeeds doesn't depend just on what was said, but on the context, the speaker, the listener, the fragile fabric of shared understanding. This theory makes every conversation more dangerous because it means we're not just exchanging facts. We're constantly performing, affecting, changing each other. You can injure with words, you can heal, you can bind someone to a future they didn't expect. And behind every sentence, the question burns, what are you really doing to me by saying this? Known ideal theory on ideal theory begins with a refusal to pretend the world is fair, clean, or ready for perfect justice. It turns its back on the crisp abstractions of ideal theory, which imagine a society where everyone follows the rules, institutions function flawlessly, and oppression is already past tense. Instead, non-ideal theory looks at the real world, unjust, violent, unequal, gasping for breath, and asks, what now? It doesn't deal in utopias, it deals in triage. It doesn't ask, what would a perfect world look like? It asks, how do we get from this wreckage to something less brutal? It begins with injustice, not as a flaw in the system, but as its scaffolding. Racism, poverty, colonialism, sexism, these are not accidents, they are built in. And non-ideal theory insists we face them as they are, not as we wish them to be. This approach is raw, grounded, deeply political. It understands that change is slow, messy, and often compromised, that the oppressed don't have the luxury of waiting for theoretical perfection, that sometimes justice means choosing the least unjust option available and carrying the weight of that choice. Non-ideal theory is not cynical, it's urgent. It's the philosophy of activists, survivors, and those who can't afford to play pretend. It says the question isn't whether the system is broken, it's who's bleeding while we debate it. It trades ideals for impact, purity for progress, comfort for truth, and it asks you, if you know the world is unjust, and you still wait for the perfect solution before acting, whose side are you really on? Reductionism, mind-body. Reductionism in the mind-body problem is a brutal simplifier. It says your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, your deepest sense of self are nothing more than brain activity. Love is chemicals. Anguish is neurons misfiring. Consciousness is the dance of electricity across gray matter. There is no ghost, no inner light, just matter behaving exactly as it must, governed by the cold laws of physics. This view doesn't whisper, it slices. It tells you that when you cry for someone you've lost, the ache is not spiritual, it's your nervous system. That your sense of freedom, your moral weight, your dreams, these are all reducible to biology, to mechanisms, to molecules following instructions written in flesh. You are a machine that feels, but a machine nonetheless. And this isn't speculation, it's the logic of scientific progress. As neuroscience maps the brain, every corner of the mind seems to yield to explanation. We can stimulate laughter, erase memory, trigger fear, all by manipulating tissue. The mystery shrinks, and reductionism tightens its grip. If every mental state has a physical cause, then why believe in anything more? But the cost of this clarity is staggering, because reductionism doesn't just explain you, it flattens you. It risks making meaning a byproduct, purpose a delusion, selfhood an echo with no center. And yet, it also gives you a strange kind of truth, that your complexity is not diminished by being built from simple parts, that even if you are made of atoms, those atoms, in the right arrangement, can suffer, wonder, love. And maybe that's more miraculous than any mystery. Narrative identity theory. Narrative identity theory doesn't ask who you are. It asks what story you're telling. It begins with a simple, devastating idea. The self is not a static essence. It is a story you build moment by moment through memory, language, and meaning. You are not a fixed core hidden deep inside. You are a plot, unfolding, evolving, edited with each retelling. This theory says that to be human is to live as a character in a tale only you can tell. Your identity is made not just of facts, but of interpretation, not just of what happened, but of how you explain it. Your trauma, your joy, your failures and victories, they are the scenes you choose to keep or cast aside, and those choices shape who you believe you are. But this power comes with danger, because if the self is a story, then it can be rewritten, it can be distorted, it can be taken from you by others who try to narrate your life for you, and it means that if you lose the thread, if your life stops making sense to you, identity itself can collapse. Narrative identity theory lives in the space between psychology and philosophy, between memory and imagination. It forces you to ask, are you living authentically or just playing a role you inherited? Have you been the author of your life or just the reader? And most haunting of all, it tells you the story never really ends, not while you're alive. Every day, with every breath, you are choosing the next line, even now, especially now. Global skepticism. Global skepticism is the dark undercurrent of philosophy, the voice that never stops asking, how do you know? It doubts not just this or that belief, but the very foundation of all knowledge. It whispers that every certainty might be a dream, every memory a trick, every truth a story you've told yourself so many times you forgot it was a guess. It doesn't deny reality. It simply refuses to assume it. What if you're in a simulation? What if an evil demon is feeding you false experiences? What if the laws of logic themselves are unreliable? Global skepticism doesn't offer an alternative. It just tears away the one you've trusted. It doesn't need evidence. It only needs to show that certainty is more fragile than we dare admit. This is not the skepticism of doubt about politics or science or strangers' intentions. It is total. It puts the knife to perception, to reason, to memory, to self. And once you see the knife, it's hard to unsee. You walk through the world, feeling the ground beneath your feet, and a voice inside asks, but what if there is no ground at all? For many, this view is unbearable, a philosophical abyss that offers no ladder. But for others, it is a kind of brutal honesty, a refusal to fake comfort, to settle for assumptions dressed as truth. Global skepticism doesn't offer peace, it offers clarity, the raw, painful awareness that what we call knowing might just be a candle flickering in an infinite dark. And still, somehow, we keep reaching for the flame. Rule, utilitarianism. Rule, utilitarianism is the voice of long memory and hard lessons. It doesn't ask you to calculate happiness in every moment. It asks you to build a world where happiness can endure, where choices aren't made on the whim of what feels good now, but guided by rules that have proven, over time, to lead to the greatest good. It's not about the next step, it's about the path. This philosophy watches the failures of pure act utilitarianism, the way it justifies cruelty for short-term gain, the way it sacrifices the few for the many, and it says, no, that is not the world we want. That is not a life anyone can trust. Rule utilitarianism steps back and asks, what kinds of rules, if everyone followed them, would make life not just bearable, but just, safe, flourishing? So you don't lie, even if it feels harmless. You don't cheat, even if no one would notice. Not because the moment demands it, but because the rule matters. It builds trust. It sets precedent. It shapes the moral climate we all breathe. But this is no blind obedience. Rule utilitarianism isn't about laws written in stone. It's about guides written in experience. If a rule stops serving the greater good, it must be re-examined, but not abandoned lightly. These rules are moral infrastructure, and when we tear them down too fast, we find ourselves in ruins. Rule utilitarianism believes in restraint, in foresight, in slow wisdom, because sometimes the most moral act is not the one that feels right now, but the one that keeps the world from breaking tomorrow. Consequentialist egoism. Consequentialist egoism is moral philosophy with its gaze turned inward, sharp, unapologetic, and deeply unsettling. It says that the right action is the one that produces the best outcome, but only for you, your happiness, your survival, your power. Others matter, yes, but only insofar as they affect your well-being. Altruism, compassion, sacrifice, these aren't duties, they're strategies. If they help you in the long run, use them. If they don't, discard them. This view fuses the cool logic of consequentialism with the ancient hunger of self-interest. It doesn't justify cruelty for its own sake, but it permits it if the cost-benefit balance tips in your favor. It calls into question every act of kindness. Was it really about the other person, or was it just about what you stood to gain? Praise, peace of mind, leverage? Consequentialist egoism doesn't tell you to be a villain. It tells you to be honest about the moral engine driving your choices. It peels back the moral narratives we wrap ourselves in and asks, who really are you protecting? And if helping others ever truly costs you more than it gives, would you still do it? It's a worldview that attracts those disillusioned with moral idealism, those tired of being told to serve, to give, to diminish themselves for the greater good. But it leaves behind a chill, because if everyone lived this way, what kind of world would we be building? And if your happiness rests on someone else's pain, do you still smile with clean hands? Consequentialist egoism doesn't answer. It just asks, are you brave enough to admit what you're already doing? Axiological pluralism. Axiological pluralism doesn't offer you one compass. It hands you a dozen, each pointing in a different direction, each telling you what matters. It says the moral and the meaningful are not built on a single value, but on many. Happiness, freedom, love, beauty, dignity, truth, peace, none of them can be reduced to the others. None of them can be sacrificed without cost. And sometimes they clash. This philosophy refuses the seduction of simplicity. It looks you in the eye and says, yes, justice matters, and so does mercy. Yes, honesty matters, and so does kindness. But what do you do when they demand opposite things? Axiological pluralism doesn't hand you an answer. It hands you the weight. There's no ultimate hierarchy here, no final currency to convert all values into a single equation. Instead, there is tension. There are tragic choices where doing right by one value means betraying another, and yet the values remain glowing, sacred, irreducible. This isn't relativism. It's not saying anything goes. It's saying that what's good is too rich, too human, too real to fit inside a single box. That the moral landscape isn't a straight path, but a field of competing lights, each one pulling at your conscience, and in that complexity lies both beauty and sorrow, because to live by axiological pluralism is to carry competing loyalties in your chest, to say yes to what matters, knowing it may cost you something else that matters just as much, and to keep walking anyway, not with certainty, but with care. Moral fictionalism. Moral fictionalism is the mask we wear when the gods are gone, but the play must go on. It says morality is not a truth we discover, but a story we tell. We speak of right and wrong, duty and virtue as if they're real, but deep down we know or suspect that they aren't. They're fictions, and yet we keep using them because we need them. The moral fictionalist walks a delicate line. They don't believe moral claims are objectively true, yet they still talk and act as if they are, not to deceive, but to survive, to function, to preserve the structure of human life. They'll say, murder is wrong, knowing that sentence doesn't describe a fact about the universe, but understanding that believing it, acting on it, holding others to it, matters. It is a form of strategic self-deception, or perhaps chosen clarity, like a parent telling a child stories of heroes, knowing the tales aren't real, but watching how they shape the soul. Moral fictionalism treats ethics the same way. As useful myth, it allows society to uphold laws, condemn cruelty, praise generosity, all while quietly admitting there may be no cosmic justice behind it. This view is haunting. It asks if we're prepared to live in a world without moral foundations, only moral performance. It strips morality of its divine glow and asks us to keep the ritual alive anyway. And the question lingers, aching and unspoken. If the story isn't true, but it holds us together, is it still a lie, or is it the most honest thing we have left? Quietist Wittgensteinianism. Quietist Wittgensteinianism doesn't argue. It doesn't solve. It steps back and says, maybe there was never a problem here to begin with. Born from the later thought of Ludwig Wittgenstein, it whispers that much of philosophy is not discovery. It's confusion dressed up in complexity. We get tangled in our own language, inventing mysteries where none exist, because we've forgotten how to see clearly. This view doesn't try to build a new system. It doesn't seek ultimate truths. It simply wants to untie knots. When someone asks, do we really have free will? Or what is the self? Or is the external world real? Quietist Wittgensteinianism looks not at the universe, but at the words we're using. What are we really saying? What games are we playing with language that make these questions feel profound and maybe, secretly, nonsensical? It's a philosophy of humility, almost monastic in its restraint. It doesn't chase metaphysical grandeur. It listens patiently and often ends with silence, because sometimes when a question can't be answered, it's not because it's too deep. It's because we're asking it wrong. But this quietism is not peace. It's unsettling, because it strips away the drama of the philosophical quest and says, maybe there's nothing to find. Maybe the only work left is to stop misunderstanding ourselves. Quietist Wittgensteinianism won't give you the meaning of life. It might not even say such a thing can be asked. What it offers is harder, the challenge to stop looking where there is nothing and to see, in that silence, the strange relief of no longer needing to know. Radical historicism. Radical historicism is a quiet earthquake beneath every truth you've ever held. It says that all ideas of justice, of beauty, of reason, even of truth itself, are not eternal. They are historical, born in time, shaped by power, language, culture, and context. There are no timeless principles, no universal logic that floats above history like a god. Everything you believe was made, and it could have been made differently. This philosophy doesn't chip away at certainty. It devours it. It tells you that the way you think, speak, love, and fight was forged in moments you didn't choose, by people you never knew. that what you call common sense or moral clarity is really just a sediment of the past hardened into habit. And what's most terrifying is that this past was never neutral. It was filled with war, ideology, fear, desire. History isn't a neutral record, it's a battlefield, and your deepest convictions are its ruins. Radical historicism forces you to see yourself as a creature of time, not just aging through it, but built by it. It whispers that even your resistance, your rebellion, your search for truth is soaked in assumptions handed down like invisible scripts. You are not outside the story. You are the story. And it doesn't stop, because if all knowledge is historical, then so is this insight. So is the philosophy itself. There is no escape from the loop, no final truth waiting beyond the centuries, just wave after wave of human meaning, crashing, receding, reshaping what it once swore could never change. Universal prescriptivism. Universal prescriptivism doesn't ask what's true in ethics. It asks what you're really doing when you say something is right or wrong. And it answers with a blade. You are not describing facts. You are issuing a command, a prescription, like a doctor writing an order, but not just for now, not just for you. When you say this is wrong, you're saying no one should ever do this, anywhere, under the same conditions. You're binding yourself to that judgment, universally. Developed by R.M. Hare, this view tears moral language away from the idea of objectivity as fact and replaces it with a radical kind of consistency. You don't get to say lying is wrong and then lie to save yourself. If you say it's wrong, you're prescribing a rule that must hold in every relevantly similar case, even if it costs you everything. That's where the weight comes in, because universal prescriptivism makes you live by your own words. You're not just expressing emotion. You're not appealing to divine law. You're committing yourself out loud to a principle you must accept for everyone, including your enemies, your future self, even strangers, in impossible situations. This philosophy doesn't ask what morality is. It forces you to confront what you mean when you judge. And once you realize that moral claims are universal promises disguised as opinions, a cold clarity sets in. To judge is to bind yourself. To praise or condemn is to write rules in your own name. And once spoken, they echo forever. Cartesian dualism. Cartesian dualism is the split that never healed, the wound at the center of modern thought. It began with a single defiant act of doubt. What if everything I believe is false? From that doubt, René Descartes built his foundation. I think, therefore I am. And with that, he divided the world in two. On one side, mind, invisible, thinking, conscious. On the other, body, physical, measurable, mechanical. Two radically different substances locked together in the mystery of a single human life. According to Cartesian dualism, your mind is not your brain. It is not reducible to neurons or chemical reactions. It is a separate kind of thing, immaterial, private, undetectable by science. It is the place where thoughts bloom, where pain is felt, where love aches and memories echo, and yet somehow this immaterial self controls and is controlled by a physical body. Your sorrow makes you cry. Your hand on the stove makes you flinch. Two realms bound in intimate defiance of logic. But that binding is the paradox that has haunted centuries. How does the immaterial interact with the material? Where do they meet? What are they made of? Descartes could not answer. No one has. And still, we live in the echo of that divide. We speak of mind and body as if the line is clear. We feel our thoughts as sacred, our bodies as tools. We long to believe we are more than matter. And Cartesian dualism, with all its cracks and questions, still offers that hope, that there is something in you the world cannot weigh, scan, or dissect, something that thinks, and by thinking, proves it is. Collective intentionality. Collective intentionality is the invisible thread that binds minds into something more. It begins with a simple, staggering truth. Some things can only be thought together. It's not just that we share beliefs, it's that we create realities that wouldn't exist without our shared intentions. Money, laws, nations, promises, soccer games, even language itself. None of these are merely physical. They are built from the alignment of minds. This philosophy, shaped by thinkers like John Searle and Margaret Gilbert, argues that there are mental states, we intentions, that are fundamentally different from I intentions. When we intend as a group, we don't just coordinate, we become something new, a unified subject that can act, decide, and even believe in ways no individual can alone. But this isn't magic. It's terrifyingly real. A crowd that chants, a jury that convicts, a movement that topples a regime. These aren't just individuals thinking side by side. They're part of a shared mental structure that can move mountains or burn them down. And you, in the middle of it, are both more and less than yourself. Your voice becomes part of something larger. Your actions carry the weight of us. Collective intentionality forces you to ask, how many of my thoughts are truly mine? How many of my values, traditions, or loyalties are inherited from the minds I've merged with? Where does my responsibility end? When the thought began, or when I let it become ours? This theory doesn't just describe group behavior, it pierces it, and it leaves you with the eerie knowledge that some of the most powerful forces in the world are not things, they are minds thinking together. Social constructionism. Social constructionism is the soft dismantling of everything you thought was solid. It tells you that the world you move through, your gender, your identity, your norms, your truths, is not carved into the structure of the universe. It was built, not by nature, but by people, shaped over time by language, culture, power, fear, repetition. What feels inevitable was once unimaginable. What feels normal was once enforced. This philosophy doesn't deny the existence of the world. It denies that meaning is natural. A dollar bill has no value unless we agree it does. A race is not a biological fact. It's a social classification, constructed and reinforced until it feels like essence. Even categories like madness, criminal, or success are not objective. They're judgments made within systems we didn't choose. And once you see it, you begin to feel the scaffolding behind the walls. But social constructionism doesn't just describe, it exposes. It forces you to ask, who benefits from this construction? Who wrote the rules you now take for granted? And who is punished for breaking them? There's a kind of liberation in this view, but also disorientation. If meaning is made, then it can be unmade, rewritten, resisted. But that also means there are no final answers, only shifting stories. What you call truth might be nothing more than consensus fossilized into fact. Social constructionism doesn't leave you with solid ground. It hands you a chisel and says, look around. This was built by hands like yours. Now ask yourself, will you keep it standing or start building something else? Moral particularism. Moral particularism is a revolt against the rulebook. It doesn't deny morality. It denies that morality can be summed up. No grand theory, no universal principle, no sacred list that tells you, in every case, what is right. Instead, it says, look closer. Every moral moment is its own world. What matters in one situation may not matter in another, and what is wrong here could be right somewhere else, because context changes everything. This philosophy refuses to flatten moral life into neat categories. It says that kindness can be cruel, that truth can wound, that justice can sometimes betray, that a reason for acting rightly in one case might be the very reason not to act the same way in another. There are no moral constants, only patterns, tendencies, echoes that might repeat, but never guarantee. Particularism isn't chaos, it's attention. It demands that we stay awake to the full complexity of human life, to the unique weight of each choice. It doesn't free you from responsibility. it intensifies it. Because you can't hide behind rules. You have to judge, feel, respond, here, now, not with a theory, but with presence. And that is terrifying, because it means morality isn't something you master once. It's something you navigate every day with no script, just a compass that can shake. Particularism is the ethics of the fully human, fragile, inconsistent, vivid. It asks you not to memorize what's right. It asks you to recognize it and to know that sometimes doing the right thing will feel like walking a tightrope over a chasm with no handrails, just the trembling sense that this time, this moment, matters more than any rule ever written.